Chapter 888. Boss! Boss! Fat Tai and Dabin shook off the pestering fellows. When they turned back to see this scene, they were so frightened that their eyes nearly popped out of their sockets. They hurriedly rushed over. Feng Ling quickly ran to the crack in the ice and abruptly fell to the ground. She stared in disbelief at the icy surface of the water. Her hands gripped the blood-stained snow tightly as she stared at the surface of the water. She saw that the surface of the water was gradually calming down. Neither Li Nanheng nor the person from earlier had come up. She abruptly reached out and used all her strength to scoop up the icy water. She did not manage to scoop up anything. Boss! Fat Tai and Dabin stood by the side. They were afraid that the layer of ice beneath Feng Ling would crack, so they did not directly step onto it. They stood 2 meters behind her and stared at the quiet ice hole. They sank into a gloomy silence. The nature of this ice hole was not like usual. If Boss was in danger, they could head up to support him at any time. However, below them was an unpredictable glacial river. Fat Tai was well aware of how cold it was. Looking at the calm surface of the water, Fatty's eyes instantly reddened. What should we do? Fat Tai suppressed the worry in his heart and turned to look at Dabin. Did you bring a rope? Tie it around my waist. I'll go down to look for Boss. I didn't bring it. Dabin furrowed his brows. They knew that they could not jump down rashly. Otherwise, they would undoubtedly die. Even if they had a rope to hold onto, they might not be able to pull themselves up, much less in such a situation. Feng Ling knelt by the ice hole and stared at the water. All of a sudden, her gaze shifted to the blobs of blood slowly floating up. She stared at the floating blood and wondered whose it was. All of a sudden, Dabin saw that Feng Ling was about to get up and rushed forward to grab her wrist. Feng Ling, don't be rash. Feng Ling did not speak, but stared at the ice hole in front of her. Looking at the blood on it, she frowned. However, just as the men who Fat Tai Dabin and Fat Tai Da had shaken off approached, Feng Ling abruptly shifted her gaze away from the water in front of her. She stared at them with reddened eyes and unexpectedly turned around. She raised her leg and kicked a body on the ground, sending it flying toward the group of men. She then abruptly swooped forward and grabbed one of the men's collar. She swung her fist viciously into his face and snatched his gun. With precise marksmanship, she killed 3 men. She then turned to look at the other 2 men with reddened eyes, who were unable to hit her due to Fat Tai and Dabin's interference. Feng Ling aimed the gun in her hand at the head of one of them. When the gun was dozens of meters away, she mercilessly fired again. With 2 pung-pung sounds, along with the gunshots from Fat Tai and Dabin's hands, the 2 men fell to the ground. From head to shoulder, blood splattered everywhere. Looking at the corpses on the ground and the pool of blood mixed with the snow, none of the 3 men looked happy. They turned back to look at the quiet water in the ice hole. It had been several minutes. Any normal person would find it hard to survive in this place. After all, the temperature of this river was not something a human body could withstand. However, none of the 3 men spoke. Fat Tai and Dabin continued to stare up. Feng Ling's back was to the water behind her, her hand gripping the gun handle tightly. All of a sudden, there was a splash from the water behind her. Someone had emerged from the water. Boss! Fat Tai and Dabin abruptly shouted in that direction in disbelief. Feng Ling also abruptly turned around. First, she saw a pair of hands reaching out from the water, firmly and accurately climbing onto the edge of the ice hole. Following that, Li Nanheng's head emerged from the water. In this extremely cold weather, the man's entire body was covered in blood as he climbed onto the edge of the ice hole. The man used the last bit of strength he had left to find an exit. Before his strength was completely exhausted, Feng Ling and Dabin immediately rushed over to grab one of his hands. Fat Tai was afraid that he would be in danger if he stood there with his weight, so he stood behind Feng Ling and told her to lie down. Then, he tugged on her leg to help her pull back. Finally, the 3 of them worked together to pull Li Nanheng out of the water. Li Nanheng fell onto the ice and took several deep breaths. At the same time, he coughed out 2 mouthfuls of water and closed his eyes. However, they could see that he was breathing heavily, but his strength was completely exhausted. Feng Ling, Fat Tai, and Dabin removed their winter clothes to cover him while checking his body. There were no injuries. It seemed like the water on the surface belonged to the other party and not Li Nanheng. To avoid being surrounded by others, Dabin and Fatai used their strength to help Li Nanheng up. They turned back to give Feng Ling a look. "Let's go." Feng Ling caught the guns that Dabin tossed over. She rearranged the bullets in the 2 guns in her hands and placed them by her waist. If there was another ambush, the 2 of them would support Li Nanheng while she dealt with the enemy. Just like that, they quickly moved along the river and returned to the safe and hidden path. In the 10 minutes that they walked back up the mountain, Li Nanheng, who was initially breathing heavily, was no longer moving. Dabin occasionally reached out to feel his body temperature. As he did so, he frowned and said in a low voice, "It's similar to Fatty's situation that day. It's already a miracle that boss was able to deal with that piece of trash and climb back up safely in such a cold environment. The temperature is beyond what a normal person can endure, but right now his body temperature is rising rapidly." After that, they did not speak anymore and only sped up to return. When they returned to the camp at the top of the snow mountain, Dahu and the others had already dealt with the group of people. Seeing Feng Ling and the others had returned, they were about to welcome them when they saw Li Nanheng being supported from afar. Their hearts immediately skipped a beat and they quickly ran over. "What's wrong? Let's talk in the tent. Hurry, boil water, boil more water." Dabin instructed as he quickly helped Li Nanheng into the tent. Dahu nodded and turned back to call out to the other 4 people. Everyone immediately gathered. Although she was worried, Feng Ling was still one of the people in charge of this operation at Rogers Pass. She paused outside the tent and turned back to look at Dahu, who was about to go to another tent to boil water. "The people on the other side of the mountain have been dealt with?" Dahu nodded. "There are only about a dozen people up there. They have been hiding behind the mountain wall, not daring to come out. But if they dare to poke their heads out, we will instantly kill them. They have all been dealt with." Chapter 889. When I was underwater, only half of my body was in the water. I felt as though I was going to freeze in an instant. The cold air kept coming out of my body. I couldn't move at all. Standing by the bed, Fatai watched Li Nanheng, who had been quickly changed into dry clothes, but had fallen into a coma due to a serious high fever. He said sympathetically, "Boss, you can hold on for so long. You're really not a human." "Scram. Why are you still making sarcastic remarks at a time like this?" Dabin scolded him. "I'm not being sarcastic. I'm just saying that I understand how uncomfortable boss is feeling right now. In this kind of cold water, and with such a sudden high fever, I'm lucky that I survived." Fatai frowned. "Boss's fever has reached 40 degrees Celsius in an instant. It's even worse than when I was at that time." In fact, Fatai was right. No matter how good Li Nanheng's physique was, it was not easy for him to come out safely in the cold water that was beyond the range of ordinary people. Even Li Nanheng couldn't resist this kind of physical limit and collapsed in the end. However, the current situation was that even though they had prepared sufficient cold medicine, such as cold medicine and fever medicine, his body temperature still did not drop in the past hour. Instead, it rose by a few tenths of a degree. He really couldn't continue to burn like this. At the same time, they helped him to cool down physically. Fortunately, after experiencing what happened to Fatai a while ago, everyone was familiar with the physics of lowering the temperature. They cooperated very well, and their speed was also very fast. Because they were the ones who had taken care of Fatai, they helped Li Nanheng change his clothes, quickly wiped his body, and did not ask Feng Ling to intervene. Seeing that they were taking care of boss, even though Feng Ling couldn't feel at ease, she trusted them very much. They had just finished dealing with those people, and couldn't gather everyone in the tent. Feng Ling went out, and reported the situation to the base hall, using the only cell phone that could temporarily contact the base. She also asked Dahu to go down with her to count all the corpses at the foot of the mountain, and on the opposite side of the mountain, and then reported them one by one. When the sky was completely dark, Feng Ling and Dahu returned to their camp. The moment they returned, they saw that they were already busy preparing dinner. Everything was peaceful inside and outside, except for Li Nanheng, who was lying in the tent. "How is it? Has boss's fever subsided?" Dahu quickly walked over and asked. One of the members, who was squatting on the ground and busy setting up the fire, shook his head. Dahu frowned. What should we do? Boss, don't collapse. With that, he turned back to look at Feng Ling. Feng Ling, contact the base's doctor. Before he finished speaking, Feng Ling had already entered the tent. Everyone else had already left. Only Fat Tai and Dabin remained inside. Fat Tai sat at the table not far away, scratching his ears and cheeks in frustration and worry. Dabin reached out to feel Li Nanheng's body temperature from time to time, but his brows were tightly furrowed. Seeing that Feng Ling had returned, Fat Tai stood up to ask, Have you informed the base's infirmary? I have. They have already contacted the doctors in Montana to rush over. However, the entire city of Montana is snowy today, and the plane cannot take off. If they rush over in the snow, it will take at least dawn tomorrow or even longer, Feng Ling said in a low voice. We can only think of a way to stabilize boss's body temperature ourselves. Fat Tai had a high fever for 3 consecutive days. At that time, his temperature was 39 degrees Celsius. Right now, boss's temperature is 40 degrees Celsius. If it goes any higher, he won't be able to endure it. Dabin furrowed his brows. Furthermore, although boss is unconscious, he hasn't completely fallen asleep. He should be feeling very uncomfortable. The coldness in his body has seeped into his bones, but his body temperature is still so high. If this continues, the extreme temperature inside and outside of his body won't be something an ordinary person can endure. But since the doctors can't rush over for now, we can only lower his temperature ourselves, Dabin said with a frown. Dabin continued, I just called Dr. Wen. Dr. Wen told me a few effective methods to reduce the fever. Let's try them all. The next day, early in the morning, Feng Ling, who had stayed by the bed for the entire night, abruptly heard some movements. She opened her eyes to see that Li Nanheng, who had been lying on the bed, had fallen to the ground. The glass of water on the bedside table had also fallen to the ground. She instantly understood that boss had woken up and was probably drinking water. Feng Ling immediately stood up to help him up. Dabin, who was also in the tent, also rushed over to help. Boss, how are you? Feng Ling asked. However, the man did not respond. After helping him back to the bed, she could see that Li Nanheng seemed to be frowning in discomfort. Due to the high fever that had not subsided all night, his face and lips were pale and dry. Earlier, he had woken up due to thirst. When he woke up, it was only an instinctive thought. However, it was impossible for him to hold on for long. Feng Ling rushed to pour a new glass of warm water. She placed a straw in it and brought it to his mouth. As expected, when Li Nanheng frowned in discomfort, he would instinctively take a few sips when he felt the presence of the straw in water. However, he only had the strength to drink a few mouthfuls before he stopped moving. Feng Ling stood up and brought the spoon over. She slowly fed him spoonful after spoonful of water. When she had fed him more than half the glass of water, Dabin took a look at the thermometer and then shook his head at Feng Ling. It hasn't subsided, Dabin said. I'll call the doctors again. We've already informed them yesterday. It's an order from the base hall. Those doctors don't dare to delay. If they could come over immediately, it wouldn't have taken so long. As Feng Ling spoke, she picked up a cotton swab and dipped it into the water to moisten Li Nanheng's pale and dry lips. Such a high fever would cause a person's body to lose water very quickly. She had already fed him water several times last night. But right now, she could feel that because of his high fever, the water only stayed on his lips for a while before it immediately dried up. She had to continue moistening his lips like this, or else it would easily crack and bleed. Right now, what I'm most worried about is if the doctors don't arrive in time, with just the few of us. Chapter 890. I told you not to worry, but look at you. You didn't sleep at all last night. You just closed your eyes for less than an hour, and you're already starting again. Dabin watched Feng Ling moisten Boss Li's lips and sighed. Go rest first. Call Fat Tai and the others to replace you. There are so many of us. Let's take turns. It's fine. I can't sleep even if I lie down. Who can sleep with boss's fever? That was true. Although the others were not in this tent, when Dabin went to the other side last night, they did not sleep well. Even when they lay down, they could not sleep well. They were all worried about Boss's condition. They could not all stay in this tent, because Boss would occasionally have difficulty breathing due to his high fever. It would be more uncomfortable if there were too many people, so the others could only wait next door and take turns to take care of him. Although Boss can't wake up, he can still drink water. I'll go make some porridge. Feed him some. Feng Ling nodded. On the morning of the second day after Li Nanheng fell into a coma due to a high fever, a group of people were busy cooking porridge. It was difficult to feed porridge. It was not as easy as feeding water, but thankfully, Feng Ling was the most patient. Even if it took 2 hours to cook a small bowl of porridge, when it was cold, she would heat it up and feed it to him over and over again. In the evening, the doctor still hadn't arrived. They called the base, and the base was also very worried about the situation here. They said that they would check again, but in the end, the result was that they couldn't contact the doctor they had sent, and they had also temporarily lost contact with the base members stationed in Montana. At night, the base sent them a message saying that the base members and doctors had encountered an avalanche on the way here. All the cars on the road had been trapped. With the speed of rescue in Montana and the traffic conditions, they might not be able to rescue the trapped people even after another 48 hours. The base needed to send reinforcements, but the snowstorm would greatly affect the speed and quality of the helicopter rescue. In other words, in the next 2 or 3 days, even if the people of the base were here, it would be difficult for them to fly over. In addition, the doctors were trapped on the road of the avalanche, so they had to save them as soon as possible. The doctors only had a few cars, and they didn't have any auxiliary gasoline, food, or any other supplies to keep out the cold. Their lives were at stake, and there were several doctors in the cars, so they had to save them first. Even if Boss Lee was awake, he would arrange for them to save the doctors first. The snowstorm in Montana also affected the weather at Rogers Pass. Dark clouds covered the sky, and the temperature dropped several degrees. No one went out, and could only stay in the tents to keep warm. Just like this, Li Nanheng endured for 3 days. His body temperature dropped to 39 degrees yesterday, but it remained at 39 degrees and did not drop any further. He was still unconscious. On the afternoon of the third day, Feng Ling, who had been taking care of him for 2 to 3 days, could not take it anymore. She was forcefully dragged by Da Hu and Da Bin to the next room to sleep. Feng Ling was indeed tired. After being forced to drink a cup of warm water and milk, she collapsed onto the bed and fell asleep. Although she had nightmares because she was still worried, she could at least rest for a few hours. She slept until 11 o'clock at night. It was quiet on the snow-capped mountain. When Feng Ling opened her eyes, she saw that there were people lying on the beds by the side. Everyone was asleep. She sat up and quietly got off the bed. She didn't wake them up, and then went to the tent where only she and Li Nanheng lived. When she entered the tent, she could vaguely smell the scent of white wine in the air. However, in order to lower Boss's temperature, she had used white wine to wipe his body and the joints of his limbs. Feng Ling did not pay much attention to it. She walked in and saw that Fat Tai was sitting by the bed. However, his head was lowered bit by bit. It was clear that he was about to fall asleep. She walked over and patted Fatty's shoulder. She lowered her voice and asked, "Where's Da Bin? Why are you alone?" Fat Tai was startled awake. He turned back to look at her and sighed in relief. "Ah, he's on night duty today. He's patrolling outside. He's worried that there might be enemies hiding in the surroundings. So he went to the other side, and the river. He just left not long ago. By the time he comes back, it'll be daybreak." Feng Ling glanced at Fat Tai. "You go sleep next door. I've been sleeping since the afternoon. I'm fine now. I'll keep watch. You go sleep." Fat Tai nodded. He was indeed extremely tired. He stood up and stretched lazily before heading out. However, before he reached the entrance of the tent, he suddenly heard Feng Ling's surprised voice. "Why is there such a strong smell of wine? Did you wipe wine on Boss's body again?" Fat Tai paused in his footsteps. He turned back and chuckled. "No, I fed Boss a bottle of white wine." Feng Ling's hand, which was about to touch Li Nanheng's forehead, froze. She abruptly turned to look at Fat Tai. "What wine? Boss's fever is so high, And you fed him wine? Are you crazy? Don't get agitated. Fat Tai saw Feng Ling's angry expression and rushed to explain. In fact, I just experienced such a high fever a while ago. I know how uncomfortable Boss is right now. I've just measured Boss's temperature, and it has already dropped to 38.6 degrees. He's probably going to recover soon, but because of the high fever a few days ago, his head hurt so much that I wanted to die. When I was in such a state, I really hoped that someone could give me some wine, so that I wouldn't feel so uncomfortable. However, at that time, I couldn't open my eyes and didn't have the strength to speak. I felt that Boss should be in the same state as me at that time, so I fed him a bottle of white wine. It's not much, just 4 or 5 ounces. 4 or 5 ounces. If Feng Ling's eyes could kill, Fatty's heart would have been pierced by thousands of arrows. Fat Tai, this is murder, do you know? He's having a fever. It's really okay. A man won't be so weak after a serious illness. Besides, wine is like an anesthetic. It can relieve a lot of pain. Scram! Feng Ling shouted angrily. Seeing that she was really angry, Fat Tai could only stop speaking. He wanted to explain, but when he saw that Feng Ling's expression was extremely ugly, he could only wait for Dabin to return tomorrow morning. He turned to leave the tent. Feng Ling sat by the bed with a cold expression. She touched the man's forehead and picked up the thermometer by the side. When she saw that it was indeed 38.6 degrees, she released a sigh of relief. However, when she lowered her head, she could smell the scent of alcohol on the man's body. She secretly rolled her eyes at the tent next door. Seeing Fat Tai smiling fawningly at her from the window of the tent next door, she angrily reached over and tugged the curtain down, blocking the view from the other side. Chapter 891. She couldn't tell if Fat Tai was too muddle-headed or he was too kind-hearted. But this damn fatty was definitely a typical careless and heartless person. A person with a high fever shouldn't drink alcohol, even if he had a serious headache. Feng Ling was worried that Li Nanheng would continue to have a fever because of the alcohol. So she sat by the bed to test his temperature from time to time. She had already fed him the alcohol. She could only pray that Boss Li's physical fitness could withstand this damn fatty's alcohol. After observing by the bed for a while, and making sure that Li Nanheng seemed to be fine except for his slightly unstable breathing, Feng Ling got up to get some water. She then returned to the bed to feed Li Nanheng water and moisten his lips. She got up to get a basin of water to help him wipe his body, when she suddenly saw Li Nanheng's eyes slowly open. The man's alcohol tolerance was not very good because of his high fever. He looked at her with slightly tipsy eyes. Seeing that he was awake, Feng Ling immediately leaned over to him in surprise and asked softly, "Boss, you're awake?" Li Nanheng did not speak. The moment he opened his eyes, he saw Feng Ling's face, and the boy's slightly haggard appearance from taking care of him by the bed. He seemed to have lost at least 1 kilogram. "Boss." Seeing that he had woken up but did not speak, Feng Ling looked at his eyes. She didn't know if it was because of the high fever or because he had been forced to drink, but he did not look very sober. Afraid that he would have a headache, she raised her hand and gently rubbed his temples. As she did so, she said, "Does your head hurt a lot? Do you feel better now?" The man still did not speak, and only looked at her from a slightly close distance. Feng Ling felt that he seemed to be looking at her, but also seemed to be looking at something else through her face. It seemed to be focused but also seemed to be unfocused. Could it be that he had finally opened his eyes after being unconscious for many days? But in fact, his mind was not fully awake. Feng Ling hesitated for a moment, and was about to throw the towel in her hand back into the basin by the side. Just as she turned around, she suddenly felt her wrist burning. The man grabbed it, and she didn't know where he got the strength from. He just stared at her face, and without saying a word, he suddenly pulled her down. She was caught off guard, and she fell back onto the bed, lying on the man's chest. The towel in her hand fell to the ground because of her sudden movement. The basin next to her was knocked over by her leg, and the water spilled onto the ground. Feng Ling was startled. She was about to get up from his embrace, but in the blink of an eye, the man suddenly pushed her over and pressed her under his body. His eyes, which were slightly red and dark from the long period of fever and alcohol, stared at her. She didn't know how to describe his gaze, but it was like the gaze of a bloodthirsty wolf when it saw the food it wanted to eat the most. It was fierce, persistent, domineering, and greedy, adding a hint of sharpness. "Boss?" Feng Ling wanted to push him away, but the man directly held her raised hands and pressed them against the side of her head. His dark gaze locked onto her face. Feng Ling inexplicably sensed some kind of danger. She returned his gaze, and her brows immediately twitched. She rushed to get up, but the man still held her wrists tightly and pressed her down on the bed. She struggled but found that she couldn't break free from a man who had a high fever for more than 3 days. She wanted to use force again, but because she deliberately avoided his injured wrist, she couldn't use too much force to fling him away. She raised her leg and was about to use the posture of bending her knee to push him away. However, the instant her knee was bent, Li Nanheng's gaze was heavy, and he kissed her heavily. "Yiyu, what are you doing, Yiyu?" Feng Ling's eyes widened. Because of the man's sudden kiss, she instinctively looked toward the entrance of the tent. At a time like this, if Dabin returned early from his patrol and was seen by others, she would not be able to explain herself. "Boss." Feng Ling forced herself to tilt her body and use her shoulder to push him away. However, because of her movements, the man's gaze became even darker as he watched her face. He did not hesitate to kiss her again. He did not say a single word, nor did he give any explanation. He kissed her fiercely. This was a kiss that was truly fierce. Unlike that day at his residence, when he could at least maintain his consciousness, at this moment, he clearly was not sober. Because of this, Feng Ling could not push him away. No matter how she struggled, he would press her down. She suddenly regretted finding opportunities to feed him these past few days. If she directly starved him for 3 days, let's see if he would still have so much strength. Because of his fierce kiss, her lips were numb and swollen. Feng Ling's hands were pressed firmly against the bed. She opened her mouth to bite him. Although the man still had the strength to restrain her physically, his reaction speed was clearly affected. After being bitten by her, not only did he not sober up, but his eyes were as dark as the night. He ignored the bloody taste on his lips and lowered his head to bite her lips as well. Like a ferocious beast that was determined to devour its prey, he did not hesitate or show any mercy. Feng Ling was angered by his crazed actions. However, when he was rational, she could not push him away. Right now, when he was irrational and reeking of alcohol, she could not push him away at all. When her lips were bitten by this man, and she kept resisting, the man restrained her hands behind her back and held her chin with his other hand. His kiss deepened and became more resolute. With their mouths sealed, in the warm tent, the two of them seemed to be in a silent confrontation. Feng Ling glared at him, but because of her gaze and her incessant struggle, he did not hesitate to abruptly tug down his hand that was originally holding her chin. The air immediately heard a rip sound. The small shirt in the collar of her thin down jacket was instantly torn by the man, and the fabric was piled up in the collar of the down jacket. Because of this action, Feng Ling's hair all stood on end. However, no matter how she struggled, this man had thousands of ways to lock her hands and feet in such an unconscious state. When she was about to use the same trick to twist her body away, the zipper of her down jacket had already been tugged down by the man. Chapter 892. Feng Ling's body instantly trembled. She didn't care if he was drunk or confused, nor did she care about the wound on his hand. She struggled to break free. This time, the man used even more strength to press down on her. He bent down and abruptly bit the edge of her chest wrapping cloth. When the man lowered his head, his short hair brushed past her collarbone. She immediately trembled uncontrollably from the itch, as though all the pores on her body had opened in that instant. The man used his teeth to tear off her chest wrapping cloth firmly and quickly. The moment her chest suddenly turned cold, Feng Ling felt that her head was about to explode. Li Nanheng. She was afraid of disturbing the people in the tent next door, so she suppressed her voice and called his name in a low warning tone. "Don't go too far." However, Li Nanheng seemed to not hear her words. His teeth and his raised hand cooperated very well, and in a few seconds, her clothes were completely open. Feng Ling was enraged. She twisted her body with force, but the man suddenly bent down and kissed her, sealing her mouth that was about to curse. He was still burning and entangling her mouth with a burning force. She bit him with all her might, but he didn't dodge. However, when she suddenly turned her head and bit his shoulder in anger, the man only let out a low chuckle from his chest. She didn't know what this chuckle meant. It seemed that he was in a good mood, but it also seemed to be mockery, and it seemed to have other meanings. In any case, when she heard it, she felt her scalp tingle. "You really hit it well." The man's first words after he woke up were these 5 words by her ear. His voice was extremely hoarse. This hoarseness contained the haggardness of a high fever, but also some long-hidden desire that was boiling. Feng Ling's expression also stiffened because of his words. She turned her eyes abruptly, but the man took the opportunity to kiss her again. His hands were not idle. Unlike usual, he could at least maintain his rationality. Right now, he could not resist and directly pulled her pants. His clear purpose made Feng Ling's heart tremble. Damn it! Was this man crazy from the fever or drunk? Was he going to force himself on her? Or did this high fever make him so sick that he didn't even have the most basic politeness between people? "You want to come here directly?" Feng Ling couldn't push him away, and could only bite his shoulder. However, before she could bite too hard, the man tilted her chin and kissed her deeply for a long time. Finally, the man's hand touched her unprotected body. Although he still had a fever, his movements were very fast. His hands and mouth were not idle. In an instant, he lowered his head and kissed her neck and collarbone. Whether it was the man's hands or his kiss, it was as if they were spreading a prairie fire on her body, burning her to the point where her blood began to boil. He was going crazy. In the afternoon, when she went to sleep in the tent next door, she only wore a thin down jacket over her shirt and a pair of pajama pants. It was actually very easy to take them off. After all, they were very loose and soft. The neckline of her shirt was originally very large. After he pulled it open, it was scattered on both sides of her body. Whether it was the visual effect or the impact of the sight of her chest wrapping being pulled open, it all stimulated the man's nerves. It was not that Feng Ling had never seen such a thing happen on the training ground. However, right now she was actually unable to resist such an accident. The man held her and kissed and nibbled on her neck. He kissed her randomly. Sometimes it hurt, and sometimes it was kissed until it was numb. Her whole body was trembling. She didn't know if it was because of anger or because of the kisses. However, her hands were still tightly locked behind her back. Using the weight of their bodies, he pressed her hands down, and she could not move at all. When Li Nanheng finally turned his kiss to her ear, she gritted her teeth and lowered her voice to say, "Li Nanheng, are you sober or not? Are you crazy? Do you know what this place is? Someone can come in at any time. Whether it's Fat Tai De Bin or the other people next door. Anyone can come in at any time. This tent doesn't even have a door. Ugh." Before she could finish speaking, the man had already sucked her earlobe and moved around the edges of her ears. Feng Ling, who had never been stimulated like this before, trembled uncontrollably. She wanted to avoid him, but the man held her face and kissed her on the cheek. As he kissed, his hands moved to undo her clothes. Feng Ling gritted her teeth. She hated that her physical strength was inferior to his. A man who had a high fever for 3 days could subdue her. If she really met someone with brute force on the battlefield in the future, would she be sacrificed on the spot? No wonder, even though she felt that she was outstanding in all aspects, Li Nanheng always ridiculed her physical strength. It seemed like there was indeed nothing wrong with his ridicule. Compared to a tall man like him, her physical strength was indeed much weaker. Even though she was clearly being violated by him, she was actually unable to struggle free. The place that no one had ever touched before sent a numbing sensation that made her feel as though she had been electrocuted. She bit her lips and turned to glare at him. However, the man chuckled and hoarsely whispered in her ear, "Little liar." Because of these 3 words, Feng Ling felt as though she had been electrocuted from head to toe. She glared at him from the corner of her eyes and tried to move again. However, her hands, which were restrained behind her back, could not move at all. She turned to bite him hatefully, but the man turned his face and kissed her other ear. causing her body to tremble uncontrollably. She could not even use the most basic strength to struggle free. As the man kissed her, he held up one of her hands and easily pried open her fist. She thought he was going to pull her hand down again, but when she was about to struggle back, the man lowered his head and kissed her palm. This kiss landed on the slightly protruding callus on her soft, white palm. When he kissed it, the man closed his eyes as though he was pious and affectionate. All of Feng Ling's struggling movements paused because of the man's kiss. She stared blankly at the man who was pressing against her, and watched in disbelief as he kissed her palm. Chapter 893. Ever since she was brought out of the wolf's cave by those people at the age of 5, she had never shed a single tear. She didn't even remember what it felt like to cry. After so many years, it seemed like the last time she cried was when she was starving in the wolf's cave when she was 3 or 4 years old. At that time, she was skinny and couldn't eat her fill. She was young and didn't know anything. When she couldn't find food, she would cry. After that she forgot how to cry. But right now her eyes actually felt a little warm. It was clearly a thin callus on her palm, but Feng Ling felt that it was more sensitive than any other place. She wanted to retract her hand, but the man held her wrist tightly. This kiss lingered on her palm for a long time. When Feng Ling completely stopped struggling, he slowly kissed along her palm to her wrist. He kissed the artery on her wrist. Perhaps because of the artery, along with her violent heartbeat, he kissed it bit by bit, until the man's lips turned over. Feng Ling's hands instantly clenched the bedsheets under her, and her toes instantly straightened. It was as though the world had darkened, causing all the rationality in her mind to burn away in an instant. The last bit of instinct in her mind reminded her not to continue, and that she had to push him away. However, it was as though the man's warmth still remained in her palm. When the man kissed her, the pitiful gaze in his eyes was something she had never seen before. A child like her who had been raised by a wolf would one day be pitied by someone? Someone like her who had disregarded everything just to have a mouthful of hot food to eat, a warm bed to sleep in, and a good life, would also be treated so gently by someone? Would she be looked at like a woman, and even feel heartache love? Even if it was only a thin callus. Would it be treated as a trace of all the hard work and struggle in life? Would it be understood and felt heartache? She didn't know what kind of emotion was interfering with her thoughts, but she didn't move at all. She even forgot that someone might come into the tent at any time. However, the man didn't stop moving at all. Her hands kept gripping the bedsheets, and all kinds of thoughts kept circling in her mind. The man bit her lips hard because of the high fever. She couldn't help but suck in a breath of air. However, she couldn't even make a sound. She suppressed all the pain and sobs that were about to come out of her mouth. The alcohol was hot. The hope in the valley was burning hot. His body temperature was the same. The love and hate that had been buried in the base for so many years were awakened at this moment. Under the tent, under the dim light, the curtains would occasionally be blown up by the cold wind, and the small windows of the tent were completely sealed. No matter how the man moved, because his fever had not subsided, he did not sweat. However, Feng Ling's forehead was already covered in sweat. She clutched the man's arm tightly, and suddenly felt a sense of helplessness. She didn't know how to continue since things had developed to this point, but she still instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck, and felt the strong alcohol on the man's body. For nearly 2 hours, Feng Ling felt as though she was being cooked in a pot of oil, tossing and turning. In short, the first time she had sex with a man in her life was not very comfortable. Li Nanheng was not sober at all. After tasting the taste of ecstasy, he exerted more and more force. She did not even have the strength to bite him, let alone struggle. The man pinched her waist tightly, and did not stop moving. She clutched the quilt under her, feeling the man's passionate drunkenness and the burning temperature. For the first time in her life, she felt that her injury might be a little serious. And it was internal injury. When everything was over, there was still no sound outside. The man did not even have time to tidy up his clothes and directly lay on the bed. He was still drunk. She didn't know if it was because he was tired after the illness, or because he felt refreshed after satisfying his desire. In any case, he just lay down and fell asleep again. Feng Ling endured the pain all over her body, especially the terrible pain in her lower body, and barely crawled away from the man. Because of the pain, she did not hold the bed firmly and abruptly fell to the ground. She sat up and grabbed her torn clothes and chest wrapping cloth. She then picked up the down jacket and wrapped it around her body. Although it was difficult, she still dragged the luggage out from under the bed and took out new chest wrapping cloth and other clothes. She then tossed the torn clothes into the stove in the tent and burned them. She then staggered slowly into the bathroom, because she was afraid that Dabin would find something strange when he returned from his patrol. She endured the pain and took only 5 minutes to take a quick shower. After putting on her clothes, she slowly walked out and looked at the man lying on the bed. After a long time, she finally went to tidy up everything on the bed. Thankfully, the bedsheets were black, and the bloodstain was hidden in the darkness and would not be discovered. She wiped the man's body clean and pulled the bedsheets out from under him. This bastard had been suffering from a fever for the past few days. Everyone had been wiping his body to lower his temperature, so he was not wearing any clothes. She simply removed his pants and covered him with the blanket. Feeling that Dabin and the others would not notice anything, she finally let out a long sigh and sat on the bed weakly. Earlier, Li Nanhing was not conscious at all, regardless of whether it was the gentle kiss he gave her or the ferocity he displayed during that time. They were all based on his instincts. Thus, her first time was not treated gently at all. In fact, each time was more and more ferocious. She suspected that she might really be torn apart. Feng Ling sat by the bed. She felt that even the slightest movement would cause her entire body to ache. She turned to look at the man lying on the bed as though nothing had happened. Her gaze then shifted to the empty bottle of white wine on the table by the side. She raised her hand to touch her chest. Thinking back to how the man had used his teeth to tear open her chest wrapping cloth, Feng Ling felt her entire head heat up. However, Li Nanhing had already discovered it. Looking at the man's face, Feng Ling could not tell if he had fallen into a coma or was just sleeping. Would she be chased out of the base? Chapter 894. Dawn arrived. Dabin returned from the outside covered in snow. The first thing he did was to return to Li Nanhing's tent. Why did you change people? Didn't we agree to have Fatai take care of him tonight? You haven't slept well for several days. What are you doing here? Dabin shook off the snow on his clothes as he approached the bed. At the same time, he glanced at the man who appeared to be unconscious. How is it? Does he still have a fever? Feng Ling returned to her senses. Only then did she realize that she had been sitting here in a daze for several hours and had forgotten to check boss's temperature. She picked up the thermometer and said, 38 degrees. Although he still has a fever, this temperature shouldn't be a problem for boss. He's already survived 40 degrees. He should be fine now. Dabin glanced at Feng Ling as he spoke. He suddenly furrowed his brows and lowered his head to look at her carefully. What happened to your neck? Feng Ling abruptly raised her hand and placed it on her neck. Although her clothes were thick, her collar was not very high. Back then, she had been in a rush to put on her clothes and did not notice the hickeys on her neck. My throat isn't feeling well. I learned from some old people and rubbed my neck with wine. It might have turned red. From this angle, Dabin could only see a small red mark. Before he could take a closer look, Feng Ling had already covered it up by tugging on her collar. He did not suspect anything. In this world of ice and snow, anyone could catch a cold or a fever. It was normal for someone to have a sore throat. Furthermore, Feng Ling had been taking care of boss for the past few days. It was likely that she was tired and uncomfortable. Dabin, I'm not feeling well. I'll go rest next door. I know you've been patrolling outside for an entire night. I'll call Dahu over. There's no need. If you're not feeling well, hurry and lie down to sleep. No body can withstand the fact that you've been guarding here for the past few days. As Dabin spoke, he used his chin to point at the entrance of the tent, meaning to urge her to quickly go and rest. He didn't intend to keep her. Feng Ling stood up. She did not look at the man on the bed and headed out. When she was about to reach the door, she paused and turned back to speak. Last night, Fatai fed boss a bottle of white wine to alleviate his headache and dizziness. Right now, I don't know if boss's body can take it. Although the temperature has temporarily dropped, I feel that the fever might rise again at any time. You guys keep a close eye on him. F***CK. Damn fatty. Did a donkey kick you in the head? How can a person with a high fever drink alcohol? The bin was so angry that he was about to choke. He's just doing it out of good intentions. Although Fong Ling was angry, in order to prevent Dabin's bad temper from getting back at Fat Tai, she told him to keep an eye on Li Nanheng's temperature and comforted him. After Dabin angrily sat down on the bed with a straight face, he left the tent. His body was really uncomfortable and sore. He was so tired that he wanted to lie down and sleep until the sky turned dark. However, the moment she walked out, she was hit by the cold wind outside. The early morning wind was especially cold. Fong Ling released a long breath. She raised her hand and pulled her collar up a little. She stood outside for a while. She did not wear the thickest winter clothes and only wore a thin feather coat. The cold wind quickly penetrated through her clothes, but it was as though only this kind of bone-chilling cold could freeze all traces of heat inside and outside of her body. Everything returned to calmness amidst the confusion and unconsciousness. It was unknown how long Fong Ling stood outside. Fat Tai was sleeping soundly when he suddenly felt a wave of cold air approaching. He opened his eyes in fright. In the blink of an eye, he saw Fong Ling lying under the blanket about a meter away from him. She then covered her head with the blanket and fell asleep without saying a word. Fat Tai sat up abruptly and pushed her through the blanket. Hey Fong Ling, did boss's fever subside last night? Where did you go earlier? How long have you been standing outside? You're so cold that even the cold air outside has been brought in. Seeing that Fong Ling didn't respond, Fat Tai frowned and muttered, You can't lie down like this. You have to warm up before lying down. Otherwise, you won't be warm under the quilt when you're cold all over. Seeing that Fong Ling still didn't respond, when Fat Tai was about to pull her blanket, the person inside seemed to be in a very bad mood and firmly pulled the blanket up, not allowing anyone to lift the blanket. Fat Tai paused and had to stop pulling her, but he was afraid that she would really get sick. They had just come to Roger's Pass for a short time, but he caught a cold and had a high fever, and boss was still in a coma. If Fong Ling also got seriously ill, this place would probably leave a big shadow in their hearts, and they would never come here again. Fat Tai got out of bed and pushed the stove to the bedside closest to Fong Ling. After making sure that the blanket wouldn't be burned and that it could warm Fong Ling, he turned his head and motioned to the others, who were ready to get up, to lower their voices and let Fong Ling have a good rest. Everyone knew that Fong Ling had been taking care of boss these days and probably didn't have a good rest yesterday afternoon. They didn't expect that she would take care of him again last night. Even without Fatty's reminder, they consciously got out of bed and put on their clothes quietly, trying not to disturb Fong Ling. Especially when they heard that Fong Ling might not be feeling well, they decided to go to the tent next door for breakfast and leave the tent here for Fong Ling to have a good rest. After Fong Ling fell into the quilt, she felt her numb head heat up, but she only closed her eyes and didn't move. She didn't want to talk to anyone and didn't want to say a word. In the afternoon, Fong Ling was a little drowsy and couldn't open her eyes, but she vaguely heard someone go back to the tent to get something. What should we do? Didn't boss's body temperature drop a lot yesterday? How come his fever is back to 39 degrees? Boss's physical fitness and resistance are definitely the best in our base. Is this the legendary saying that he doesn't get sick for several years, and it takes a long time to recover once he gets sick? Of course not. It's all because of Fat Tai, that damned fatty, who forced boss to drink in the middle of the night. Boss hasn't woken up yet. It must have something to do with that bottle of wine. The alcohol content is so high, only Boss Lee's body can withstand it. If it were anyone else, Fat Tai would have committed murder. Boss has been sleeping for several days now. The water in the river is really terrible. Even Boss can fall down, alas. Chapter 895. Hearing their conversation, Fong Ling frowned in her sleep. She wanted to open her eyes but had no strength. Her eyelids drooped, and she couldn't open them at all. Then she heard their footsteps as they walked out of the tent. Although she wanted to wake up as soon as possible, She eventually fell asleep again. When she regained consciousness, someone was wiping her face with a cold towel. She couldn't open her eyes and only heard Dahu's voice close to her. Feng Ling must have caught a cold, but he doesn't have a fever. His body temperature is around 37 degrees. It's not serious. Let him rest for 2 days. After that, she couldn't hear clearly what the others were saying. She fell into a deep sleep again. Seeing that she had been sleeping with her clothes on, Dahu originally wanted to help her unbutton her clothes so that she could lie down comfortably. But he found that even though Feng Ling was asleep, her hand was still tightly gripping a corner of the quilt, as if she had lost her sense of security. No matter how hard he tried, he couldn't pry it off. The temperature in the tent was not particularly high. If she didn't want to take off her clothes, they wouldn't force her. He tried to lift her quilt several times, but she instinctively pulled it back and didn't allow anyone to touch it. After another day, Feng Ling heard Fatai muttering in her sleep. "Oh, what should we do? Both Boss and Feng Ling are sick. The two of them don't seem to be sick at all in our base. Now that they are sick, they seem to be accompanying each other. It's really hard for us. You still have the nerve to say that? If you hadn't secretly fed Boss alcohol, he would have woken up long ago. You can get out of bed and jump around for 5 days. Isn't Boss's physical fitness better than yours? Anyone can complain here, but you don't have the right to." Fatai was immediately scolded into silence. After a long while he said, "I was really kind. At that time, I was so uncomfortable that I wish someone could get me drunk. You are you, and Boss is Boss. How can they be the same?" Dahu smacked Fatty's head with his hand. If Boss's physique was any worse, the people from the base would have had to brave the snowstorm and risk countless lives just to send Boss to the hospital for emergency treatment. Luckily, Boss is in good health. Otherwise, you would have to bear the responsibility of a murder case. Another 2 days passed. Li Nanhing woke up. "Boss, you're awake? How do you feel? Where does it hurt or feel uncomfortable? Do you want to eat something first?" Fatai stayed by the bed and asked with an apologetic and earnest expression. Li Nanhing furrowed his brows and glanced at Fatai, who seemed to be trying to please him. He opened his mouth, but his voice was hoarse as though it was filled with sand. "How many days did I sleep for?" Fatai raised his hand and gestured 6. 6 days? Oh no, it's almost 7 days. It's already night time. Li Nanhing sat up, and Fatai rushed to help him up. Just as he was about to turn to pour water, Li Nanhing said hoarsely, "Call Dabin over." Fatai hurriedly went to call Dabin. When he called for Dabin, everyone heard him. Knowing that Boss had woken up, everyone rushed into the tent. Li Nanhing glanced at Dabin, and then at the others. Everyone was present except for Feng Ling. He did not ask. After Dabin came over, he simply asked a few questions about what happened after he fell into the ice cave, as well as about those gangsters. After asking, Li Nanhing's stamina was almost exhausted, and he was helped back to the bed. The group of people were busy preparing porridge, medicine, and water for Boss. After lying down for so long, Feng Ling did not come over. Li Nanhing asked Fatai, "Where's Feng Ling?" "Ah, Boss, I forgot to tell you. Feng Ling has been busy taking care of you for the past few days. One time, she didn't sleep for 2 days and 3 nights. Her body couldn't take it anymore, and she caught a slight cold. These 2 days, she has been resting in the tent next door." Fatai chuckled and scratched his head. He said softly, "Boss, do you really feel that there's nothing wrong with your body?" Li Nanhing glanced at him indifferently. What problem could there be? As he spoke, he moved to stand up again. Boss, don't get up. You've just woken up. No matter what, you should eat something and rest well for the night. You don't have much strength right now. I'll go check on Feng Ling." "Why are you checking on Feng Ling?" "Feng Ling is still sleeping. Earlier, when I went next door to get something, I saw that she was asleep. When we entered, we said that Boss had already woken up. She didn't say that she wanted to come over. She should really be feeling unwell. Otherwise, based on Feng Ling's concern for Boss, she would definitely come over immediately." Li Nanhing did not speak. He only watched Fatty's radiant expression. After a moment he asked coldly, "Did you do something wrong? Your entire face is filled with guilt." Fat Tai immediately choked on his own saliva. He coughed several times before looking at his boss in shock. He immediately sat down by the bed to explain. Boss, I really did it for your own good. I was afraid that you would feel too uncomfortable, so I did it. Li Nanhing frowned. What did you do? A few nights ago, when I was taking care of you here, I was afraid that your headache would be too uncomfortable. Not long ago, I experienced the feeling of my head exploding. To help you alleviate the pain, I fed you a bottle of white wine. Fat Tai pointed to the empty bottles by the side as he spoke. The other bottles were originally used to help you cool down and wipe your body. I saw that there were so many bottles left, so I directly opened one and fed it to you. Li Nanhing immediately looked at him coldly, as though he was looking at a lunatic. When Fat Tai shrank his neck on the bed with a frightened expression, he said coldly, I was wondering why my throat felt so uncomfortable these few days. Drinking on his own and being forced to drink were two completely different feelings. Fat Tai chuckled guiltily. Boss, it's good that you're fine. Li Nanheng rolled his eyes at him. Right now he did not have any strength. If he had the strength, he would really kick him off the bed. All right, scram. Fat Tai did not dare to stay for a moment longer. He immediately hid behind Dabin and Dahu, following them to prepare food for boss. After waiting for an entire night, Feng Ling did not return. Li Nanheng ate some simple food and was supported to the tent's window. Through the window, he saw Feng Ling lying on the bed next door, covered with a blanket. He did not say anything and was supported back to the bed. The next morning, Li Nanheng got up and got out of bed. Seeing that boss had really recovered, everyone didn't stop him. When Li Nanheng was about to walk out of the tent, they hurriedly took the winter clothes and put them on for him. Boss, it's getting colder these days. You've just recovered. Don't catch a cold again. Chapter 896. Compared to this tent that was especially lively after Li Nanheng woke up, the tent next door was relatively quiet. Only the occasional crackling sound came from the stove on the ground. Li Nanheng walked directly to the only bed in the pile of beds. The bed was bulging, and Feng Ling lay unmoving inside. The blanket was still covering her head. Yesterday, Fat Tai had said that Feng Ling had been feeling unwell these days. But for some reason, when she slept, she always covered her head with the blanket. She did not speak, nor did she want others to see her face. They all thought that she had frostbite and refused to see others. However, when they helped Feng Ling wipe her face that day, they did not see any frostbite. Her face was white and clean like usual, but she always covered herself with the blanket. If it weren't for the fact that they knew Feng Ling's temper was usually so reticent, and that she did not like to speak when she was unwell, everyone would have thought that Feng Ling had isolated herself from the world. The man looked down at the simple bed in front of him. Feng Ling usually did not sleep with others. During the days when he was sick, she did not care about the trifles, and slept on Dabin's bed for several days. Feng Ling, he called out. The person on the bed did not move. Covered by the blanket, she did not seem to hear him. Li Nanheng's gaze turned cold. He raised his foot and kicked the side of the bed twice. The person on the bed still did not move. Li Nanheng reached out to tug the blanket off her body, only to find that the person inside was not asleep. Instead, she was holding onto the blanket tightly, unwilling to let go. The man narrowed his eyes coldly. What are you doing? Why are you hiding in the blanket? Come out. The person under the blanket still did not come out. In fact, she held on even tighter. Li Nanheng's expression was cold as he used force. As he tugged the blanket away, Feng Ling, who had been lying on the bed for 3 days, suddenly grabbed a pillow and smashed it harshly against his face. Li Nanheng was caught off guard. Of course, he did not expect her to suddenly throw the pillow at him. He was hit by the pillow. It did not hurt, but the man's eyes were filled with hostility as he glared at her. The pillow fell in front of him and landed on the ground. Feng Ling rolled from one bed to the other, but the one next to her was Fatty's quilt. Fat Tai usually didn't shower, so she was unwilling to lift his quilt to cover herself. She simply rolled to a place 3 or 4 beds away, sat up, and was about to get off the bed. She didn't even look at him. Li Nanheng stood in place and watched her movements and the expression on her face. He narrowed his eyes slightly. "What are you doing? Since you've woken up, you should be resting in the tent. Why did you come here to torment me?" Feng Ling put on her shoes and stood up. Originally, she wanted to walk out, but her rationality reminded her that she could not do this. She resisted the urge to shoot him and turned to look at him. For 3 whole days, she had been lying there for 3 whole days. Her body and heart were finally starting to recover. She was no longer as sore as before, but her first time had still fallen into the hands of this bastard. It hurt so much that even her nightmares these 2 days were filled with scenes of him fiercely penetrating her body. "They said that in order to take care of me, you didn't sleep for several days and fell sick. I just woke up last night. This morning, I had the strength to get off the bed, so I came to take a look." The man looked at her angry face and walked over. He was about to tug her hand over, but Feng Ling quickly dodged. Seeing her suddenly rejecting him, Li Nanheng walked up to her and lowered his eyes to look at her coldly. "What's wrong with you? Why are you throwing a tantrum like a woman? And why are you throwing a tantrum without warning? What did I do to provoke you again, eh?" Feng Ling's expression faltered, and she abruptly raised her eyes to look at him. The man had really just recovered from a serious illness. His handsome and indifferent face looked a little thinner, and his face was also a little pale. He stood in front of her and stared at her face as if he wanted to see through her. Feng Ling's heart immediately skipped a beat. Without waiting for her to speak, Li Nanheng coldly narrowed his eyes. "Because I fell into the ice hole that day and scared you." Feng Ling was silent for a moment. "No. Then why are you giving me that look?" Feng Ling clenched her fists by her sides. He didn't remember. He didn't know. He actually didn't remember anything. For a moment, she didn't know whether she should be glad or angry. She was glad that her secret could still be kept. She could still continue to live in 11 base. She didn't need to be separated from this group of brothers, and didn't need to be driven out. What she was angry about was that this man didn't remember anything after doing that to her. Feng Ling's heart had never been so complicated. She clenched her fingers tightly. When Li Nanheng noticed her abnormal expression and leaned over to look at her, she was about to take a step back, but the man took a step forward and held her chin. Li Nanheng looked at her and said, "Li Nanheng, don't worry." The moment his fingers touched her, Feng Ling's mind suddenly recalled that night when this man's hands touched her body. Those flames, she suddenly trembled all over and wanted to retreat, but the man held her chin and looked into her eyes. "If you have something to say, say it. Don't hold it in." She immediately turned her head away and raised her hand to slap his hand down. "No, I'm just not feeling well, and don't want to deal with too many people and things. Since boss has just recovered from a serious illness, go back to rest. There's no need to come to see me. I'm fine. You're so haggard. If I didn't know better, I would think that the person who had a high fever for 6 or 7 days was you," Li Nanheng said coldly. Feng Ling sneered inwardly. Who was the one who tortured her to this state? She did not explain. After a moment she asked, "Fatai fed you alcohol that night. Do you remember?" Li Nanheng looked at her. "I don't remember. I was muddle-headed from the fever and was fed alcohol. Do you think I'm an immortal who can stay sober at all times? If I hadn't heard them mention it after I woke up, I probably wouldn't have known that I was almost murdered with alcohol in my illness." Feng Ling, looking at her expression, Li Nanheng suddenly narrowed his deep black eyes. "Did something else happen that night when Fatai forced me to drink? Or was there another reason? What's with your expression?" "No." Feng Ling raised her eyes to look at him. His eyes were calm and puzzled, but her gaze was not so calm. She only met his gaze for a moment before quickly looking away. Seeing Feng Ling's sudden expression and attitude, Li Nanheng's expression did not change, but he clearly sensed that something was wrong. Chapter 897. Feng Ling originally thought that she would have to deal with Li Nanheng for a long time, because of her gender being discovered. However, since the heavens were helping her, even if she was extremely unhappy, she could only endure it. In the end, she did not say a single word about that matter. However, just because Feng Ling did not mention it, It did not mean that Li Nanheng did not notice her abnormality. It had been more than a week since he had recovered from his illness. Feng Ling did not even ask for a change of accommodation. She directly moved a foldable bed over and placed it by the 1.5-meter tall bed. Not only that, she directly asked Dabin to sleep with him in this tent. She squeezed with the others in the other tent and slept on Dabin's original bed. Her explanation was that recently, her mental condition was not too good, and she could not shoulder the responsibility of taking care of Boss. If Boss's illness had not fully recovered, it would be convenient for Dabin to take care of him. She would sleep by the side with the others. In any case, they were all grown men. It did not matter which side they slept on. This situation had already lasted for nearly a week, almost 10 days. Nightfall. Li Nanheng placed one hand under his head and laid on the bed. He watched as Dabin returned from his patrol. He shook the snow off his head and entered the bathroom to wash up. Not long after, he walked out bare-chested. He lifted the blankets and burrowed into the blankets. He comfortably hugged the blankets and hummed a few times. Then he said, "Boss, I'm asleep. Good night." Li Nanheng made an indifferent end sound through his nose. It was as though he was responding, but also as though he was snorting coldly. In less than 5 minutes, continuous snoring sounds could be heard from Dabin's bed. Accompanied by the rhythmic snoring, Li Nanheng closed his eyes, but he couldn't fall asleep at all. The moment he closed his eyes, he saw Feng Ling's expressionless face during the training in the snow for the past 2 days. And every time he approached her, Feng Ling instinctively took a step back and maintained a distance with her cold eyes. The snoring grew louder and louder. Li Nanheng abruptly lifted the quilt and got up. He picked up his winter suit and put it on. Then he walked out. He went to the tent next door and watched a group of men snoring in a crooked posture. Li Nanheng walked to the innermost bed with a dark face. Feng Ling was sleeping properly on the bed, and there was no sound. The quilt was neatly covering her body. As the man approached, Feng Ling abruptly opened her eyes, due to being stared at by a pair of eyes. However, before she could see clearly that the person by the bed was sleeping, the blanket over her was abruptly lifted. She abruptly sat up and was about to defend herself when Li Nanheng threw the quilt aside and saw the man's face clearly. The coldness in her eyes instantly turned into calmness. She said lightly, "Boss, get up and go to sleep next door with me." Without saying anything, the man looked at her coldly, not to discuss with her, but to order. Feng Ling sat on the bed without moving. "Boss, it's quite good for me to sleep here. Also, it's convenient for Dabin to take care of you." "Take care of what? Do you see how weak I am? I've long recovered. Why would I need someone to take care of me?" The man's tone was impatient. "Don't talk nonsense. Hurry and go back with me." Feng Ling refused to reply. She insisted on sitting on the bed. "Isn't it the same for me and Dabin to sleep on? Boss, why do you insist on me going back?" Li Nanheng glanced at the men who were snoring loudly. "How can you sleep with this kind of snoring? Dabin is even louder than them. No matter how long I stay in the base, I sleep alone. You can sleep quietly and won't disturb me. Dabin can't. He's too noisy." Although Boss Li was used to sleeping alone, she heard that he could even sleep in the mud when he was out on missions. There were many comrades by his side, and his snoring at night was not lacking. Why did he have to be so spoiled here? Feng Ling glanced at Dahu. "Dahu doesn't make much noise when he sleeps. You can call Dahu over." Before she could finish speaking, the man reached out and grabbed her collar, dragging her down. Just as Feng Ling was about to struggle, he pulled her into his arms. He pressed her shoulders firmly and looked down at her condescendingly. "Don't talk nonsense. Go back with me. Let go." Every time he touched her, Feng Ling's hair stood on end. Especially in such a position, her nose was instantly enveloped by the man's body heat and the scent of his hormones. She was so sensitive that she felt uncomfortable all over. Not only did Li Nanheng not let go, but he also did not take her winter clothes. In any case, when the others heard that it was him, they let down their guard. They turned over and continued to sleep, snoring everywhere. No one would look at them. He directly opened his wide winter clothes and wrapped Feng Ling in his arms. Just like that, he forcefully brought her out of the tent. Feng Ling struggled the entire way, but was still forcefully dragged into the neighboring tent by the man's brute force. When they arrived at Dabin's bedside, Li Nanheng kicked the bedside. Dabin abruptly woke up. He thought that something had happened, and was about to quickly put on his clothes out of habit. However, he abruptly saw Boss Li's heavy expression, and Feng Ling's unsightly expression. His brain momentarily went into a state of stupor. Several seconds later, he finally reacted. Scram back to sleep next door. Li Nanheng was expressionless. His voice was cold, as though if he dared to stay here for one more second, he would directly kick him down the mountain. Dabin did not say a word. He was sleepy, and it did not matter where he slept. He quickly got off the bed. As he was only wearing a pair of large underpants, he was afraid that it would be too cold outside, so he wrapped the blanket around himself and quickly ran out. Looking at the empty bed, Feng Ling was about to say that there was no blanket and that she should return next door. However, before she could speak, the man directly kicked the light folding bed to the side and forcefully dragged her back to the bed that had always been hers. He pressed her down by the bed. The moment Feng Ling touched this bed, she felt as though she was traumatized. She trembled and wanted to stand up, but the man pressed down on her shoulders and firmly made her sit down. Stay here obediently. Sleep the way you slept in the past. Li Nanheng watched her coldly. My illness has already recovered. My temperature is normal. I won't infect you. And I don't need you to take care of me all night. Now lie down and sleep. Feng Ling struggled for a moment, and the man finally moved his hand away from her shoulder. Chapter 898. When she got up and was about to go over, Li Nanheng stood by the bed and looked at her indifferently. He didn't say a word, but his eyes and movements clearly showed that he didn't allow her to go over. Feng Ling had no choice but to sit back down because of his forceful posture. Feng Ling, did I offend you during my stay in Rogers Pass? The man looked at her with narrowed eyes. No. Why are you throwing a tantrum? Lie down. Li Nanheng resisted the urge to tear down the folding bed next to him and looked down at her. I don't want to say it again. Lie down and sleep right now. Feng Ling didn't want to show her temper too obviously, but after so many days, she knew that Li Nanheng was calm enough. Now that she had returned to this tent, it was useless for her to do anything. She could only pretend that nothing had happened. After remaining silent for almost half a minute, she straightened her clothes and tugged her collar, which had been pulled crookedly by him earlier. She laid down, flipped over, and lay on the innermost side of the bed with her back facing him. She closed her eyes and was about to fall asleep like this. Li Nanheng didn't force her to do anything else. He just looked at her for a moment by the bed, threw his winter clothes aside, and lay down. The moment the man laid down, Feng Ling thought that it would be fine for her to sleep with her back facing him. However, as soon as he laid down, even though the two of them were separated by at least 20 centimeters, her sensitive body tightened. The memory of that night on this bed invaded her mind, making it impossible for her to calm down and fall asleep. After lying down, Li Nanheng raised his hand in satisfaction, because it was still the same person beside him. He rested his head on his arm and closed his eyes. It was quiet at night. Feng Ling had been pretending to sleep with her eyes closed, but the man behind her seemed to have fallen asleep. His breathing was even and steady. She couldn't fall asleep at all. She quietly sat up and was about to find a chance to get out of bed, when the man still rested his head on his arm and closed his eyes suddenly spoke, and his voice was sleepy and hoarse. Sleep well. Don't think about running out to feel the cold wind. Feng Ling paused. She tried to control herself, turned to look at the man with his eyes closed, and said impatiently, I can't sleep. Go out for a walk. Li Nanheng opened his eyes and looked at her. Why can't you sleep? Something on your mind? Or because of me? I just don't understand. I've only had a high fever for a few days. Why are you suddenly showing me such an expression? No, I haven't been feeling well recently. I don't have the patience to do anything. Boss, you don't have to pay so much attention to me. It's all an unnecessary misunderstanding. Feng Ling's expression was stiff. Li Nanheng narrowed his eyes and sneered. Don't you know why I deliberately paid attention to you? She abruptly recalled the 2 times he had openly confessed to her. She paused and did not speak anymore. She lay back down, pulled the quilt over herself, and was about to sleep. She did not want to speak another word with him. She really didn't know whether she should be glad that he didn't remember or angry that he didn't remember. Perhaps both. Otherwise, she wouldn't have been so uncomfortable in her heart for so many days. She didn't want to talk to him, didn't want to see him, didn't want to stand too close to him, didn't want to smell his scent, and didn't even want to hear his breathing when he slept. After living for so many years, Feng Ling thought that she was indifferent to everything and did not care about it at all. In the end, she was completely defeated by Li Nanheng. For the first time, she knew how it felt to be impetuous every day because of a man. She didn't sleep very well that night. After forcing herself to fall asleep, she still had nightmares. In the dream, she stood in the conference hall of the base, surrounded by a group of leaders of the base, the elders of the Li family, the leaders of the United States, and the United Nations. Everyone was pointing at her and talking angrily. They were angry that she had deceived everyone, and that a man had hidden in the base for so many years without being discovered. In the dream, even though Feng Ling was scolded by a group of people, she still stood upright in the middle, neither humble nor pushy. Then someone threw something at her head. Even though she didn't know what was thrown and didn't feel any pain, there were still things being thrown at her. She turned around and saw that it was those people who surrounded her, who kept scolding and throwing things at her. Some people even came up and forcibly tore her clothes apart, forcing her to show them the breast wrap inside. A group of people frowned at her breast wrap and looked displeased. In the end, everyone shook their heads and left. Then they suddenly handed her a letter of dismissal, ordering her to leave the base and never to approach 11 base again. This dream made Feng Ling toss and turn. She kept frowning and didn't sleep well. She had already regarded the base as her home. She didn't want to leave. If she left the base, she didn't even know what to do in the future. Hearing that Feng Ling didn't sleep well after falling asleep, Li Nanheng opened his eyes and looked at her, only to see that there was a layer of sweat on her forehead, and she had been frowning, as if she was struggling and resisting something in her dream. He stared at her for a moment, then reached out and pulled her into his arms. Then, using the position of hugging her to sleep, he looked down at the fine sweat on the tip of her nose. He wiped the tip of her nose with his fingers, and then gently patted her shoulder. The loneliness and fear and the nightmare had been surrounding her. Suddenly, Li Nanheng's figure appeared in the base hall. When everyone was about to drive her out of the base, the man walked up to her and suddenly held her in his arms. The warmth in the man's arms suddenly made her feel a sense of belonging. She stood stiffly and didn't move. She couldn't hear the man's voice above her head, but could only feel the warmth in the man's arms. Perhaps it was really useful to sleep in his arms. Seeing Feng Ling's frown gradually relax in her sleep, Li Nanheng smiled lightly and raised his hand to rub the short hair on her head. It was only when she was asleep that he could take advantage of the distance between them to hug her. He felt that he might really be possessed. Not only did he have feelings for a man, but he also left the base for him and lived in a damn place like Rogers Pass for nearly a month. There was a unique fragrance on Feng Ling's body. It was not only the scent of the shower gel, but also the fragrance lingered in his nose. Chapter 899. However, before he kissed her, at such a close distance, Li Nanheng suddenly went into a trance. He looked at Feng Ling's face, and then at her lips. Such a distance, such a kiss angle. Some strange images suddenly flashed through his mind. Those images didn't seem to be scenes he had experienced in a dream, but something that had happened in reality. When did he press her down on this bed? And when had he kissed her on this bed? But the scene that popped up in his mind made him stare at Feng Ling's face with a heavy gaze. Since coming to Rogers Pass, although he had never hidden his feelings for Feng Ling, he had never done anything that she didn't like. After all, in the base, he only kissed her that night, but she dared to raise a gun against him the next day. He was not so beastly as to do anything to her when Feng Ling had been resisting. But those images couldn't have appeared for no reason. He kept looking at Feng Ling's face and tried hard to recall, but he could only recall the images of him pressing her down on the bed and kissing her, and he was not sure if it was the scene he had dreamed of at night. In order to recall clearly, Li Nanheng directly kissed her on the lips. Feng Ling's lips were so soft that he wanted to drill his tongue into them and entangle them deeply. He restrained the impulse and only felt those images in his mind flickering. Making sure that Feng Ling's nightmare should be over, Li Nanheng let go of her, let her lie flat on the bed, sat up, looked at Feng Ling, and then turned his eyes to the small table beside the bed. There was no wine bottle on the small table, but when he glanced at it, he remembered that there were several empty bottles on the small table on the day he woke up. Did it have anything to do with the wine that Fatai fed him that night? The next day it was Fatty's turn to patrol. However, when he was about to go down the mountain, he suddenly found that Boss Li had also come. The two of them went down the mountain side by side. Fatai looked flattered. "Boss, are you going to patrol with me?" Li Nanheng glanced at the white snow around and said coldly, "I want to ask you something." "Ah, what do you want to ask, boss?" "Did anything else happen the night you forced me to drink when I had a high fever?" Fatai thought back carefully. "No. That night, when I said I gave you alcohol, Feng Ling was very angry and directly chased me out. But that night, De Bin was patrolling. He probably went back to check on you in the middle of the night. If something happened, he would definitely tell us. That night, Feng Ling stayed in the tent to take care of you. Feng Ling didn't sleep for several days and kept watching over you. What else could have happened? Feng Ling is very angry." "That's right. Just like everyone else, when they heard that I forced you to drink, they all scolded me for being unreliable. Feng Ling scolded me the same way, and then chased me out. In fact, that night, I was supposed to take care of you, boss. I wanted to let her have a good rest, but she must have been worried. After sleeping for an afternoon, she went over again. I saw that Feng Ling was angry at that time, so I was afraid that I would really anger her, so I left. That's it." "Yeah, nothing else happened?" "No. At that time, I was in the tent next door and didn't fall asleep for a while. In fact, I was worried that it was not good to force you to drink. I sat on the bed and thought for a long time. You didn't hear anything at that time?" "No, it was very quiet." "How long did you sit on the bed and think after returning to the tent?" "About 5 minutes." Li Nanheng. Hey, boss, why are you leaving? Don't you want to patrol with me? Don't you still have questions to ask? Why are you leaving, boss?" They had thought that they would stay at Rogers Pass for at least 3 months. To their surprise, after a month, they suddenly received an urgent notice from the base. The big shots of the United Nations and the U.S. military were going to visit 11 base. They were very confident and curious about the current situation of the sniper team, so they came to take a look in person. The training of the sniper team had been suspended for a month because of Feng Ling's deployment. Now they had to be called back to resume training immediately. Otherwise, if the 5 members of the sniper team were still immature when they returned, the U.S. military would take this opportunity to slander 11 base and take back the authority assigned to the base. Feng Ling didn't say anything. When Feng Ling went back, the others would definitely go back with her. After all, they came together and had to leave together. To be fair, if there were still people stationed here, another group of people from the base would be sent here. Li Nanheng planned to directly send several elites from the base over, so the mission at Rogers Pass ended 2 months ahead of schedule. Autumn had officially entered Los Angeles, and the temperature in the area where the base was located was at least 7 or 8 degrees lower than a month ago. And after returning to the base, they could no longer eat and drink every day like when they were in Rogers Pass. In an instant, they were busy with training in various training camps. The training schedule of the sniper team was quickly accelerated. The training that usually added up to about 7 or 8 hours was increased to 10 hours. There were also 2 more hours of training at night. Several special sniper training sessions were also added. Li Nanheng personally joined the training team and took turns to train the 5 of them with Qiao Fei. At 9 o'clock in the evening, the training ended and Feng Ling went straight back to her residence. After coming back, everyone was busy these days. Li Nanheng didn't go to the base's conference room for a meeting today. When Feng Ling walked back to her residence, He happened to go downstairs, and the two went upstairs together. Feng Ling walked forward all the way without looking back. Without saying a word or greeting him, Li Nanheng looked at her cold back, walked to the floor where she lived, and was about to tell her about the recent arrangements of the base for the sniper team. However, when they arrived at the door, Feng Ling opened the door and went in, slammed the door with a bang, and didn't even give him a chance to speak. Standing in the corridor with the automatic lights on, looking at the closed door next door, Li Nanheng's eyebrows twitched. Just as he was about to walk over, suddenly his cell phone rang. Li Nanheng picked up the phone. After hearing what the person on the other side said, he paused, looked at the closed door in front of him with a meaningful look, and turned to walk out. Chapter 900. Li Nanheng took the things they handed over, looked at them, and glanced at one of them. Did you find it under the chair? Yes. After the two of us finished the training of Team 3, we sat in the canteen and drank tea for a while. Just now we were a little hungry, so we ordered 2 servings of rice, so we stayed here for a long time. Feng Ling was eating here before. Feng Ling. It was her again. Li Nanheng quietly clenched the small piece of sanitary napkin, wrapped in a white translucent thing in his hand. Although they were all men and never touched this thing, it didn't mean that they didn't know what it was used for. Boss, that. A member of Team 3 stepped forward and whispered to Li Nanheng. I heard from the brothers of Team 1 that Feng Ling usually doesn't live with us. Is she really? He pointed to the thing in Li Nanheng's hand again and whispered. Is she a woman? Li Nanheng's expression was indifferent. It's too arbitrary to determine whether a person is a man or a woman based on this kind of thing. Besides, if she is really a woman, you guys from Team 3 can't even beat a woman. Don't you have the face to stay in 11 base? The two of them were speechless and looked at each other. Feng Ling was usually so delicate and tender. If it weren't for the fact that she was very agile and fierce in every assessment and training, everyone would have long suspected her. But seeing that boss didn't allow them to talk nonsense in the base before they confirmed the truth, the two of them didn't dare to talk nonsense anymore. However, it was not difficult to see from their eyes that this kind of suspicion had long existed in the hearts of the members of the base. However, it was Feng Ling's convincing skills that stopped everyone from talking. In addition, everyone in the sniper team was united, so no one dared to speak carelessly. Thus, even if there were some people who liked to spread rumors and ask around, they couldn't find any concrete evidence. They could only spread a little bit like gossip, but it didn't affect the peace on the surface. Li Nanheng looked at the small piece of sanitary napkin in his hand again, and was about to turn back. Suddenly, a voice came from the side. Oh, Boss Li, how did this thing? Hearing the movement behind him, Li Nanheng turned his eyes expressionlessly, only to see the only woman in the canteen, Auntie Jelly, who was already 45 years old, walking over anxiously. Looking at the things in his hand, she wanted to take them away, but she didn't dare to do so because the other party was Boss Li, so she didn't know whether to raise her hand or withdraw it. Li Nanheng glanced at her and frowned. Is this yours? Auntie Jelly nodded again and said with some embarrassment, Oh, I'm really old. I always do stupid things. Last month, I went out of the base and bought a bag of this stuff. I left it on the cabinet in the storage room in front of the cafeteria. It happened to be a few days ago, so I used it directly and put the rest in my pocket. Just now, when I came to clean the tables and chairs here, I didn't pay much attention and a piece fell out. Although I'm so old, and my children are about the same age as you, it's still too embarrassing for you young men to see this. Boss Li, I'm really sorry, Auntie Jelly said as she walked over nervously and took the piece of sanitary napkin from Li Nanheng's open palm. After taking it, she took out a big bag of sanitary napkins from the canvas bag she was carrying. The men present looked at it and found that the small piece was the same as the one in her big bag. The color, style, and size were all the same. In front of them, Auntie Jelly put the small piece of sanitary napkin back into the big bag with embarrassment, which was neat and not awkward at all. Boss Li, I'm really sorry. I will pay attention to it in the future. I know that there are few women in 11 base. This thing may be like big news in the eyes of the young men. I will definitely put it away in the future. Auntie Jieli continued to apologize apologetically, and her eyes were full of guilt. Li Nanheng didn't say much but just said lightly, "Well, put away your things. Auntie Jieli, as the only woman in the entire base, you'd better not misunderstand me." When he said this, his eyes were already looking at the two people from Team 3. The two men immediately understood what boss meant. So this was just a misunderstanding? This thing belonged to Auntie Jieli? So it wasn't left here by Fengling at all? If that was really the case, then it was indeed a big mistake. The two hurriedly nodded and said with smiles, "It's a misunderstanding, a misunderstanding. We saw Fengling eating here, so we thought it might be her food. But since it's not, it must be a misunderstanding. It seems like we've made a mountain out of a molehill. Well, we'll leave first. Boss, you should go back and rest early." With that, the two men pushed each other and hurried out. When the two men left, Auntie Jieli nodded politely and respectfully to Li Nanheng, said a few words of apology, and turned to go back to work. Li Nanheng stood in the canteen of the base for a while without any movement. He just looked at the empty and dark training grounds outside the window, the lonely lights around the ground, and the night sky with only a few stars outside the window. These days after returning to the base, there were some strange images hovering in his mind every night. Some kisses, entanglements on the bed, and even some actions that only men and women would do on the bed. He thought it was just a dream, but it seemed like a dream. With such suspicions, he tried to ask Fengling about it for several days, but Fengling kept avoiding him. He heard that Auntie Jieli continued to clean up, and the cleaning machine and sterilizer were pushed out. This was the disinfection process that must be done in the canteen after dinner every day. Li Nanheng glanced at it, turned and walked out. Seeing that Li Nanheng's tall figure had walked out of the canteen and into the night without looking back, Auntie Jieli immediately put down her hands on the two machines and looked forward for a long time. A few minutes later, after confirming that Boss Li had really left, she breathed a long sigh of relief and quickly picked up her cell phone to make a call. Fengling had just returned to her residence and was about to take a bath, but because of her period she hesitated. It seemed that it was not convenient to take a bath today, so she could only wipe her body. Chapter 901. Little Feng. Auntie Jieli's voice came from the other end of the phone. She lowered her voice and whispered, "I was scared to death. I was almost discovered just now." "Almost discovered what?" Fengling wondered. "The 2 sanitary napkins I gave you. How could you be so careless? You left them in the canteen and were discovered by 2 guys in the base. Fortunately, I saw them when I came out. Otherwise, I don't know what would have happened." Fengling's calm expression froze. She frowned and searched her body. Sure enough, the sanitary napkins Auntie Jieli gave her were gone. When she was about 13.5 years old, about a few months after she entered the base, her period came for the first time. Since then, her period had been very accurate every month. At that time, she looked up some information on the internet and learned about the physical changes of girls during puberty. Then she took advantage of the weekends when she could leave the base to buy all kinds of sanitary napkins and secretly stored them. Because her period was very accurate every month, she remembered it and never made a mistake. But last month, probably because of the extreme weather on Rogers Pass, which affected all aspects of her body, this month's period actually came 5 days ahead of schedule. She was unprepared. When she was eating alone in the canteen in the evening, Auntie Jieli passed by behind. She got up and was about to pour water, when she suddenly asked in a low voice in surprise, "Little Feng, why are you bleeding?" Fengling froze and looked back, only to see a small piece of blood overflowing from the back of her trousers on the chair. Although it was only a small piece, Auntie Jieli, who was also a woman, saw through her at that time. Fengling liked to go to the cafeteria to eat the food cooked by Auntie Jieli, and would often help out in the cafeteria. Auntie Jieli had always liked her very much. When she heard that Fengling was an orphan, she always felt sorry for her and treated her as her godson. Therefore, after Fengling's explanation, Auntie Jieli agreed to help her hide the truth and gave her 2 menstrual pads. At that time, Feng Ling went directly into the bathroom to use one and put the other in her trouser pocket. She didn't notice it and went back to her seat to continue eating, but she accidentally dropped it on the ground. Who discovered it? A warning immediately popped up in Feng Ling's mind, and her eyelids twitched. It seems to be Team 3, but it's okay. I explained it to them. Anyway, I brought it to you. I took out my big bag and let them see that it was mine. I told them that I accidentally dropped it in the canteen when I was cleaning here. Auntie Jieli said with a smile. But you must be careful in the future. Auntie Jieli said with a smile. But you must be careful in the future. It's really bold of you to pretend to be a man at such a young age. I can help you today, but I may not be able to continue to help you in the future. Besides, there are so many people in the base. You were still a child a few years ago, so you could pretend to be a man in front of young boys. But girls and boys will be completely different after they are 17 or 18 years old. You will be more and more obvious in all aspects. You may be discovered one day. Ling Ling heart Ling Ling said. I Feng Jieli Feng. Feng Ling sigh. It's not that troublesome. It's just that my heart is constantly beating fast, afraid that you'll be discovered. Sigh. Auntie Jieli was about to say that Boss Lee also saw it just now, but the timer on the cleaner beside her hand rang. She came back to herself and said, I have to continue cleaning. I have to talk to you later. Be careful. If you are discovered, you will really be driven out of the base. I don't want you to be driven out. Feng Ling nodded gratefully, and the two hung up the phone. Auntie Jieli sighed, put her cell phone in her pocket, and turned to continue cleaning the canteen. However, at the moment she turned around, she was startled, took a step back, and stared blankly at the man who had returned to the canteen. The tall man was standing 2 meters behind her. His dark and cold eyes were staring at her coldly. It was like an X-ray that no one could avoid, exposing her lies in an instant. Lily, boss. Auntie Jieli's face turned pale, and she clenched the handrail of the cleaner nervously. The man's cold and deep voice suddenly sounded. Who did you give those 2 pieces to? Who disguised as a man and mingled in the base at such a young age? Auntie Jieli's heart beat wildly, feeling that a big secret was about to be revealed because of her. Usually, there would be no one in the canteen at this time. She was used to cleaning here alone, and thought she was alone. She didn't expect that Boss Lee would come back. From his words, it was clear that he had been listening from the moment she called Feng Ling. What should she do? Who will be driven out of the base after being found out? The man's eyebrows were sharp, and his silent and deep eyes were cold. Auntie Jieli clenched the handrail of the cleaner, and didn't know what to say. He helped Feng Ling hide the truth because he liked that child. It was out of affection, but it was also her duty to tell the truth to the boss of 11 base. After all, she had a stable job in the base for so many years, and relied on the Li family's money to support her. And since Li Nanheng suddenly came back, it was obvious that he had long suspected that those words just now were just for the 2 boys of Team 3 to hear. So Boss Lee was protecting Feng Ling's reputation, right? Looking at Auntie Jieli's hesitant expression, Li Nanheng's eyes were cold. Tell me the truth. Auntie Jieli bit her lip, and didn't know whether to say it or not. But Li Nanheng snorted coldly. Is Feng Ling a woman? Although it was a question, it was obviously a very definite answer. There were many doubts about a person, and all kinds of coincidences connected together. When there were too many, it was no longer a coincidence, and the doubts were no longer doubts, but conclusive evidence. Auntie Jieli was so anxious that her eyes turned red, as if she was about to cry. If it weren't for the fact that Boss Lee hated lying, she would have knelt down to him and begged him not to drive Feng Ling out of the base. She said with red eyes and trembling voice, Boss, although I only work in the canteen, I think it's the same whether they are male or female, as long as I can. Chapter 902. Auntie Jieli didn't want to betray Feng Ling, but Boss was right in front of her. She really couldn't deceive a person who obviously knew the truth as a child. Not only could she not protect Feng Ling, but she might also irritate him. After hesitating for a few seconds, she slowly nodded. Yes, Li Nanheng's eyes were as dark as two bottomless pools of ink. Boss, don't blame her. Feng Ling has performed very well in the base for so many years. Except for her gender, she is no different from other boys. And I heard those boys say that they can't beat her. Look, she is so excellent. You can't drive her away just because she is a girl, right? Auntie Jieli tried to persuade him. I know the base has its own rules, but Feng Ling works so hard. I really don't want to see her driven away. Boss, don't blame her. Li Nanheng's face didn't change at all. He just glanced at her indifferently. What's the matter with that thing just now? Auntie Jieli said with red eyes. Feng Ling's period came today, but maybe it was suddenly advanced. She didn't prepare for it. I found the blood, so I gave her 2 pieces. I didn't know she was a girl until today. The more she spoke, the more anxious she became, and in the end, her eyes were full of begging. Don't drive her away, boss. Li Nanheng's eyes were cold, and he suddenly turned around and walked out. Auntie Jieli was about to chase after him, but she saw the man's back was cold and determined. He was tall and had long legs, and now he had walked into the night outside the canteen. What should I do? Auntie Jieli glanced at the phone, wondering if she should inform Feng Ling. But judging from Boss Li's expression just now, if she continued to get involved in this matter, neither she nor Feng Ling would have a good time. And he was obviously going to settle the score with Feng Ling. It was useless for her to inform Boss Li now. After walking about 100 meters away from the canteen, Li Nanheng took out his cell phone and called Xiao Su expressionlessly. Pay Auntie Jieli's 10-year salary in the base cafeteria and give her $300,000 as a subsidy to persuade her to leave the base tonight. Tell her that I told her to keep everything she knows to herself and not to communicate with anyone. Xiao Su didn't understand. He was about to ask when he heard Li Nanheng's cold voice. You don't need to understand. Just do it. Xiao Su. Okay. The tall and straight man strode across the spacious road of the base. All the suspicious points in his mind were connected together, and his face was so dark that it seemed like ink was about to drip out. From the accidental glimpse in the sauna room of the orphanage, to the inexplicable inability to restrain himself every time, and the scenes in his dreams these days after returning to the base, he actually allowed a woman to repeatedly lie in front of him for so long, watched himself confess his love to her uncontrollably, and watched himself, a man of indomitable spirit, rather admit that he was gay than tell the truth because of this love. When he warned her to be honest again and again, she actually fooled him again and again. How much courage did she have to disguise herself as a man in a place like 11 Base? And who gave her the courage? After being almost discovered by him in the orphanage, she still dared to come to the base and approach him like this? She was really bold. She dared to raise a gun at him, and would rather be sent to Rogers Pass than tell the truth. Okay. Very good. He walked back to the residence he shared with Feng Ling. When he passed downstairs, Kay and Tam were sitting outside smoking. Seeing Li Nanheng coming back from outside, they immediately stood up one by one and greeted him. Hello, boss. Li Nanheng didn't even respond and walked straight in. Kay turned to look at Tam in surprise. Did I see it wrong? Boss looked like he was going to take revenge. Tam. I think so too, Kay. Who is he going to take revenge on? Tam pointed up. Probably maybe, except for the few of us outside. There is only Feng Ling inside, right? Feng Ling hadn't gone to take a shower yet. She was a little upset because of what Auntie Jieli said just now. Many of the people in Team 3 liked to make trouble for her because they were not convinced. She didn't know if the sanitary pad incident would cause any trouble. Just as she changed the black trousers stained with a little blood, put on another clean pair of trousers, and was about to take off her uniform jacket, she suddenly heard footsteps outside the door. Then the man outside didn't knock on the door but said coldly, "Open the door." As soon as she heard Li Nanheng's voice, Feng Ling paused and turned to look at the door. Although she didn't want to see him, and had been hiding in the base for so many days, he was still her boss, and he lived next door to her. It was so late. If he had nothing to do, he wouldn't suddenly come here. But she didn't quite understand why her eyelids were twitching. She walked over, hesitated for a moment, and opened the door. The moment the man opened the door, His eyes fell on her face, and his calm eyes soon made her realize the danger. Especially when the man caught a glimpse of the trousers she had thrown in the basket in front of the bathroom door. His eyes were indescribably deep. Feng Ling's expression didn't change, and her tone was calm and indifferent. "Boss, it's so late. What's the matter?" Li Nanheng didn't know how strong his willpower was to restrain his urge to strip her and said, "Go to my room and sort out the recent information on the computer. Type out the numbers and save it on the computer desktop." His voice was light and light, neither too loud nor too soft, but she could hear every word clearly. She could even feel the coldness in his words. This was indeed the job she had promised before. Feng Ling didn't suspect anything, walked out of her room, and walked quickly to the next door. After Feng Ling walked out, Li Nanheng stood in front of the door, looked at the room that was still clean and simple without any trace of a woman, and walked in. He walked to the bed and glanced at the black suitcase under the bed. He had seen her put this suitcase under the bed more than once. It was the same when they were on the snow mountain. A dream that he was not sure about suddenly popped up in his mind. It was so bizarre that he could not figure it out. In the dream, he seemed to have bitten a piece of cloth that was wrapped around her chest, and bit it open. What was that strip of cloth? The man's eyes narrowed coldly, and he suddenly kicked the suitcase out from under the bed. Chapter 903. The suitcase was opened. A few clean and flat white breast wrappings were placed in the middle compartment of the suitcase. All the answers were completely revealed, and there was no longer any possibility of concealment. Li Nanheng looked at those things indifferently, bent down, picked up the strips of cloth, looked at them briefly, put them back calmly, closed the suitcase, and pushed it back under the bed. Then he kept squatting by the bed, slowly turned his eyes to the direction of the bathroom, got up, walked over, pushed open the bathroom door, and saw a few toiletries placed there. There was still a faint fragrance inside, which was unique to Feng Ling. Turning to look at the table next to him, the man pulled open the drawer with one hand. Sure enough, there was a pack of sanitary napkins that only women would use. They were white and soft. Lying inside, it was as if the huge truth that had been hidden for many years had come crashing down on him. So it was really a woman. Next door, Feng Ling turned on the computer and quickly sorted out the documents. At the same time she looked back. She didn't close the door, thinking that Li Nanheng would come with her. But it had been a few minutes, but he hadn't come yet. Could it be that he had been waiting in her room? With a loud bang, a clap of thunder across the sky pierced the sky, and a flash appeared and then disappeared. Feng Ling's face was slightly illuminated by the computer screen. Her eyes were calm and gentle, looking at the documents on the screen and carefully sorting them. However, these documents looked old. In her impression, she seemed to have seen these documents last time. Why did he suddenly ask her to sort out these old documents? Could it be that there were new instructions in the base? Just after Feng Ling sorted out the documents, she suddenly felt a prickling feeling on her back. Her fingers jumping on the keyboard stopped, and she looked back at the man who had stood in front of the door. After the man walked in, his eyes fell on her, and he walked directly behind her. His eyes were on her. Feng Ling had never seen such a look in his eyes, and there seemed to be an obvious emotional change, but when she was about to see something, it seemed to be covered by something. Is there something wrong with these documents? Feng Ling asked subconsciously. Li Nanheng's eyes were cold and deep, and some things in his heart were endlessly vigorous. Some shock from the depths of his soul made him surprisingly calm. He took out a silver lighter from his trouser pocket and said lightly, "No problem. Tidy up your things. Don't ask more questions." Feng Ling glanced at him again, but the man had turned and pushed the window open, walking to the balcony of his room. Li Nanheng turned his back to Feng Ling, who was busy in front of the computer. He held his cell phone with one hand, took out a cigarette, and put it in his mouth. Listening to the sound of the keyboard and mouse behind him, he turned his noble face sideways and looked indifferently at the empty and dark base. Feng Ling didn't know why, but she felt a certain sense of oppression from his back. The man was smoking. She looked up at him and paused for about 10 seconds. The man turned his back to her, blue smoke rings into the night sky, and said coldly, "Don't be in a daze. Go on." Feng Ling quickly retracted her gaze and stared at the screen, but her fingers on the keyboard slowed down a little. She didn't know what happened, but what the two people of Team 3 found today should have nothing to do with him. Besides, Auntie Jelly was so tight-lipped, so she definitely wouldn't say anything. Boss usually didn't like those people of Team 3, so he shouldn't have had a chance to see them at such a late hour. But out of worry, Feng Ling occasionally looked up at the man's back. However, she saw that he just stood there smoking and didn't want to say anything to her, force her to do anything, or target her. "Feng Ling," the man's low voice mixed with the heavy rain that gradually fell with the wind and thunder outside the window, with a different kind of charm. "During the days when I had a high fever on the snow mountain, nothing happened?" Feng Ling looked back at the computer screen, saved the file, marked the date and said calmly, "No." It seemed to be the expected answer. He was full of lies. Li Nanheng still maintained his rationality. Otherwise, he would have directly pulled out the dagger in his trouser shoe and cut her clothes. I suddenly remembered that the computer is full of old files from some time ago, and the new files will not be sent to the mailbox until tomorrow morning. The man said seriously, "Put it there. Don't sort it out." Suddenly remembered, Feng Ling stopped and looked coldly at the man on the balcony. "Boss, you are really forgetful." Hearing this, Li Nanheng turned his eyes and said slowly, "What else did I forget? Why don't you remind me? Maybe if you remind me a few more times, I'll be able to remember what I should remember." "No," Feng Ling said with a straight face. "Boss, I guess you are too busy. It is normal for you to remember the wrong time. After all, you are the boss. Even if you ask me to take out the files from a year ago and reorganize them, I won't have any complaints." At this point she continued, "So can I go back now?" Li Nanheng put out the cigarette but in his hand and said indifferently, "Go back." So simple. It seemed that nothing had happened. Feng Ling felt a little nervous and instantly relaxed. But did he really ask her to come over to sort out the old files in the evening, just because he forgot? Feng Ling felt that she really didn't pay enough attention to Boss Li's thoughts. Usually, she didn't deliberately guess his thoughts, and now she couldn't understand him. "It's raining outside. Remember to close the doors and windows." Li Nanheng looked at the rain outside the balcony and said coldly, "It's almost winter. Don't wear too little." Hearing this, Feng Ling turned her eyes to him, but all she could see was the man's back. However, his words were more or less pleasant to hear. She nodded and left. However, after returning to her room, she looked at the things under the bed and everywhere around her. There were no changes that shouldn't have been there. It was raining heavily. This should be the last rain before winter this year. The wind was biting and cold, but compared with the cold wind on Rogers Pass, it was not worth mentioning at all. Chapter 904. No one could see Li Nanheng's expression at this time. The rain seemed to be peeping at some unpredictable secrets. It fell on the window quietly as if it didn't exist, but because of the light in the room, it shone brightly. The man's eyes under his black hair were as deep as the sea. From the moment he learned the truth until now, a certain rhythm in his heart that had been unable to calm down had still not calmed down, and was still beating at an uncontrollable speed. Even his breathing was a bit agitated. It turned out to be her, the bold little girl who jumped into his bathtub when he was an orphan, and dared to get rid of their people and cars in a jungle when he was tracking her. She successfully escaped from the jungle, and even left a provocative signal on the other side of the river. He knew that all kinds of coincidences couldn't be just a coincidence, but she was so fast and fierce that she didn't look like a girl at all. A thin little boy just wanted to stay in the base, and he didn't need too much care and attention, but as time went by, even he didn't know when he began to be attracted to her. The light in the window next door was dim, but a few minutes later, the curtains were suddenly drawn. The people inside couldn't be seen, but in the blurry light on the curtains, he could see the boy. No, the girl was taking off her coat, and then she didn't continue to take it off, but walked straight into the bathroom. Seeing this scene, Li Nanheng suddenly touched the corner of his mouth with the tip of his tongue, and no one could understand the emotions in his eyes. Only the unlit cigarette that was crushed in his hand could feel his impulse to strangle someone at any time. The base archives room. The door was suddenly opened, and the member who was on duty in the archives room woke up with a start. He stood up abruptly by the small window and saw that the person who came was Boss Lee. He immediately came up in surprise. Boss Lee?" The tall man held a black umbrella in his hand, and the umbrella was dripping water. After entering the door, he said directly, "Give me the information of Feng Ling and the sniper team, including the information when she entered the base, and the updated level information every year." The member of the archives room froze for a moment. "All." The man's eyes were dark. "All right." Under normal circumstances, the files of the members of the base could not be taken out casually. However, since the person who came was Boss Lee, it was a different story. In any case, Boss Lee was in charge of the sniper team. It was likely that he had something to do. It was likely that he wanted to raise Feng Ling's training level. Not long after, with the information in hand, the man put the information into a waterproof file bag, turned around, and walked out of the archive room with a black umbrella. After returning to his residence, Li Nanheng lit another cigarette, but still did not smoke it. He threw the cigarette box on a stack of files in front of him and looked at the photos of Feng Ling in the base for several years. As the fair-skinned youth gradually grew up and matured, even the outline of the 2-inch color photo could clearly see the obvious changes in him. Other men's faces gradually became more defined as they grew into adulthood, but Feng Ling's cheeks were more and more similar to a woman's oval face. The curve was gentle and smooth, and although there was a heroic aura that other women did not have, she was clearly a woman. As the smoke lingered between his fingers, Li Nanheng looked at the photos on the files, and his eyes became darker and darker. He had been thrown into the base to train since he was a child. For so many years, in this 11 base, there was a person that he felt he couldn't handle. The kind of person that he couldn't handle was not because he could let her carry out devil training at night at will, nor could he control the difficulty of her mission and life and death at will, but that person's heart. Li Nanheng pressed the cigarette into the ashtray, picked up the stack of files and read page by page. His eyes were calm and emotionless, but there was a layer of mist in them. He was indifferent and calm, but he did not lose the dominance of a superior. Li Nanheng thought that although he was the person in charge of the base, he did not have a strong desire to control. As long as the base members under his command could meet his requirements, it would be fine. But for such a Feng Ling, he found that he had a deep desire to control her. He wanted to firmly tie her to his side. She must cry because of him, and she must laugh because of him. He was so frustrated that he thought he was gay. As a result, damn it, Feng Ling was a woman? Li Nanheng leaned back in his chair, holding the stack of documents with one hand. He threw all the documents into the drawer by his hand and pressed the other things on top. His movements were elegant but obvious. He locked the drawer and threw the key into the trash can by the door. When he looked at the trash can, his mind reflected the pair of silicone breasts in it when he came back from the bar. He knew that the feeling he felt at that time couldn't be more real. No matter how fake it was, it couldn't be so real that he, a man, couldn't not feel it. He should have known how tight-lipped Feng Ling, this dishonest guy, was. If someone else told her a secret, she would definitely guard it to the death and not spread it, let alone her own secret. It was such a big secret again. Feng Ling got up early the next day. After returning to the base, she was used to getting up early, so that she could avoid Li Nanheng. However, when she opened the door and was about to leave, she suddenly bumped into the man who also came out of the next door. However, the man did not look at her because there was a water room on this floor. The drinkable water they usually used to make tea or coffee was there. The man held a transparent glass in his hand and walked straight in front of her without looking back. Feng Ling did not look at him, but walked out quickly. When she turned the corner of the stairs, she paused for a moment and quickly turned to go downstairs. When the man walked into the water room, although he did not look in that direction, he saw Feng Ling pause there and quickly turned her head, as if she wanted to pretend that she didn't care. Li Nanheng slowly curved his lips, and there was a trace of gentleness between his cold brows. The game began. Once, a mouse put on a cat's skin and swaggered through the market. Now it was time for the cat and mouse game. Morning training. Because of the heavy rain last night, the temperature suddenly dropped a lot today, and the air was cold. Feng Ling's usual training state was similar to today's, but because her period came early, she felt a dull pain in her stomach. Sure enough, she caught a cold when she was in Rogers Pass. It would take her a while to recuperate. Chapter 905. Feng Ling shook her head. I'm fine. My stomach doesn't feel well. Xiao Fei looked at her carefully, and then at her expression. Although he didn't know if it would be too abrupt, he still asked in a low voice. Is it the days that women have every month? Feng Ling immediately took a look at him. As a grown man, he knew a lot. Although she didn't want to say this kind of thing, she still nodded. But it's okay. Just train as usual. Now the sniper team was strengthening their training every day. Although the weather was cold, they couldn't easily stop or rest. After all, the United Nations and the US military were going to send all kinds of big shots here soon, especially to investigate the situation of the sniper team. Can you hold on? Yes. Okay, I'll just practice shooting today. Don't do other movements. Don't move too much. It seemed that she didn't intend to delay the training because of this kind of thing. Although Xiao Fei wanted to ask her to rest now, he looked back and saw the other four were still practicing. So he had to continue to let her practice, and only occasionally handed her a cup of hot water during the break. She went to the canteen at noon. Usually, Auntie Jieli was resting in the morning, and only worked at noon and evening. Feng Ling wanted to thank her for what happened last night, but when she arrived at the canteen, she learned that Auntie Jieli suddenly resigned last night, and left the base overnight. Resigned? Was it because of her? Was it because Auntie Jieli wanted to keep this secret for her? But because she was an honest person, she simply left the base for fear that she would cause trouble if she let it slip? Auntie Jieli had been living well in the base. If her secret hadn't been accidentally discovered by Auntie Jieli, how could things have developed to this point? Feng Ling couldn't eat much for lunch. She kept thinking about this matter. While others were still eating, she got up and went out to call Auntie Jieli. But after getting through, Auntie Jieli said that her phone had been turned off. Feng Ling was not reconciled. She was afraid that Auntie Jieli left because of something else. So she went back to the canteen to ask other staff and chefs. But no one could tell her the reason. They only said that Auntie Jieli packed up and left last night. She didn't say anything when she left, but she seemed to be very calm. She didn't seem to be angry or aggrieved. She didn't seem to have anything difficult to say. After packing up, she left without saying anything. This matter suddenly became a big stone in Feng Ling's heart. She had been absent-minded during the afternoon training and didn't sleep well at night. When he woke up the next day, his stomach did not hurt as much as yesterday, but there was still some vague pain. Moreover, his physical strength would not be as good as usual during these few days of the month, so he would feel tired easily. When they went for morning training, Xiao Fei probably already had an idea of what to do. He let them do some simple warm-up exercises with small movements, and then they continued to practice their shooting. They didn't do any exercises that were too big. During the break, Xiao Fei handed her a glass of water just like yesterday. Since yesterday afternoon, not only did you look bad, but you also seem to be in a bad mood. If there's anything, just say it. I'll help you solve it. Don't be alone. Feng Ling took the water. Nothing. It's just that Auntie Jieli suddenly left. It's hard for me to eat the food she cooks in the future. Xiao Fei immediately burst into laughter and raised his hand to rub her head. You don't look like a foodie. Don't you usually eat whatever you want? Now you are picky. How can you be so sad that an auntie of the canteen left? Feng Ling paused when Xiao Fei rubbed her head. She just glanced at him and didn't say anything. Li Nanheng, who went out to deal with a small case with the police yesterday and came back today, saw this scene when he passed by the entrance of the sniper team training camp. The man was wearing a white shirt and black trousers, but he wasn't wearing a suit jacket. Instead, he was wearing a black combat jacket. It wasn't particularly suitable for matching clothes, but on the man's tall and straight body, it gave off a different kind of handsome feeling. Li Nanheng glanced at Feng Ling sitting on the bench, holding a cup of hot water in her hand, and obediently allowing Xiao Fei to rub her head, and a trace of coldness appeared in his eyes. After returning to the base, the first thing he planned to do was to change his clothes and change out of the shirt and trousers he had always hated to wear. But now it was clear that there was a more urgent matter. He turned around and walked straight into the training camp. Boss, Kay and the others greeted him, but Li Nanheng ignored them out of habit. They just smiled and greeted him. Anyway, boss was the boss. Hearing the commotion, Xiao Fei turned back to see the man approaching. Then he saw Li Nanheng approaching coldly. It seemed that his target was Feng Ling. He subconsciously took a step to the side and intentionally shielded Feng Ling, who was sitting on the bench behind him. At the same time, he said, "Boss, the small case you cooperated with the police to solve has already been completed. The progress in the training camp yesterday and today is very good. The 5 of you are now very good at designing sniper rifles and can pass the inspection." Li Nanheng didn't have any warmth in his eyes. Seeing Xiao Fei shielding Feng Ling behind him in a protective posture, his eyes suddenly darkened. He took off his jacket and folded it in the crook of his arm. Just like that, he wore a white shirt in the weather that was 3 to 4 degrees below zero. He then casually pulled open a few exquisite and expensive buttons on the collar of his shirt, but the temperature in his eyes was frighteningly cold. Although her sight was blocked by Xiao Fei, the surrounding air seemed to be several degrees lower, and Feng Ling could feel it. She held the glass cup in her hand, but her stomach was not very comfortable. If she could avoid provoking him, she'd better not provoke him. Anyway, Xiao Fei was standing in front of her, and it was useless for her to ask Xiao Fei to leave now. "It's so cold that you have to sit on the training ground and drink hot water?" Li Nanheng looked at Xiao Fei's face, but his voice was obviously speaking to the people behind him. Without waiting for Feng Ling to explain, Xiao Fei directly said, "Boss, the temperature has dropped in the past 2 days. There will be an important examination soon. We can't let them catch a cold or fall sick. I specially placed the thermos here, so that they can drink more hot water." "Really? Why don't the others have hot water in their cups?" Li Nanheng glanced at the hot water on Feng Ling's cup, and then coldly looked at the cups in the hands of the others. But when he turned back, looking at the hot water on the cup, thinking of her special situation in recent days, he instantly understood why she had to drink hot water these days. Chapter 906. Li Nanheng was about to bypass Xiao Fei and pull Feng Ling up, but when he was about to move, he caught a glimpse of several members of Team 3, who happened to pass by the training camp of the sniper team at this time. The members of Team 3 seemed to inadvertently look in this direction, and then at Li Nanheng and Xiao Fei, who seemed to be confronting each other because of Feng Ling. They immediately turned back and whispered to each other. It seems that what they said last time was right. There is indeed something wrong with this Feng Ling. Is she really a woman? Could it be that boss hid a woman in the base, so that he could do that at any time when it was convenient? I think so. Wasn't Deputy Drillmaster Qiao in Team 2 before? When did he become so close to Feng Ling, who was assigned to the sniper team from Team 1? Just now, someone passed by and saw him pour hot water for Feng Ling. It seems that the other members didn't receive such treatment. Gee, if she is a man, she must have a problem with his sexual orientation. If she is a woman, then the problem is even bigger. The base explicitly stipulates that women are not allowed to participate in training or become members of the base. If she is really a woman, oh, it's really hard to imagine. Didn't they see those things in the canteen last time? I think it's very likely that the auntie of the canteen suddenly left, so there's no way to find the source of the truth. Is it possible that Boss Lee is afraid that he secretly hid a woman by his side, so he don't talk nonsense? It's okay to guess whether Feng Ling is a woman or not, but Boss Lee has not been in the base in the past few years. Didn't he return to the Lee family at that time? I guess he is still in the dark. Who knows whether Boss has suspected it or not? Of course, we are just suspicious, but I think this Feng Ling is really like a woman. From her height to her face, which part of her looks like a man? Feng Ling should be 17 or 18 years old now. I didn't see an Adam's apple in the past few years, but I think she should have one now. Have you noticed it? Does she have an Adam's apple? I haven't been too close to her, so I really didn't notice it. If she is not a woman, how can she use things like sanitary napkins? Can it be used by us men to pat our buttocks at night? Ha 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 ha. Mother ***, lower your voice. Don't let anyone hear you. If that happens, all of us will have to bear the consequences. The question is she a man or a woman? They whispered to each other at the entrance of the training camp and took the opportunity to walk away. As they walked, they said, I don't know. I think it's very likely to be a woman. Let's find some time to test her. Although those people were far away, Li Nanheng could still roughly read their lips. He put one hand in his trouser pocket and glanced at Feng Ling coldly. The police station has been chasing the murderer of a criminal case recently. They need manpower, and they need someone who knows how to use a sniper rifle. Since your training has met the standard, you don't have to worry about the inspection in a few days. Go to the police station to help for a few days. Feng Ling didn't say anything. Instead, she looked at Feng Ling coldly. Xiao Fei was about to say something when Feng Ling answered. All right, I understand. Tomorrow morning, pack your things and go to the police station. Bring a sniper rifle. There are a few snipers among the murderers. They will face them head-on. You go and cooperate with the police. Don't send anyone else to the base for the time being. Okay. She still had no doubt. When she was in the cafeteria today, although she was a little worried about Auntie Jelly, she noticed that some members of the base passing by seemed to be looking at her with a strange look in their eyes. The matter of the sanitary napkins must have been spread by the members of Team 3. No matter how Auntie Jelly explained it to them, no one was a fool. After all these coincidences, it was impossible for them not to suspect it. Of course, they just suspected it. She had never been interested in other people's opinions. Although Xiao Fei wanted to say something, he couldn't interfere in the end. After all, he was just a drill master, not the person in charge of the base. Xiao Fei looked back at Feng Ling again, asking her with his eyes if she could handle the situation as a sniper for the police alone. Feng Ling gave him a reassuring look. Seeing the exchange of eyes between the two, Li Nanheng's eyes darkened, but he didn't say much. When he turned back expressionlessly, he looked coldly in the direction in which the members of Team 3 left, and said in a voice as cold as ice, Leave tomorrow morning. The team allows you to go back to pack your things and report to the police station. You can skip the evening training. Feng Ling was really worried about continuing the training at night because of her stomach discomfort. She was afraid that she couldn't hold on, or that her menstrual blood would flow more and more because of physical overdraft and excessive exercise. Xiao Fei was too protective of her. At this time, he couldn't be too obvious, so he couldn't let her rest, but he didn't expect that Li Nanheng would suddenly exempt her from the evening training. Did Boss Li attach great importance to this matter in the police station? The cold-blooded maniac, who had always been extremely demanding on her body, would ask her to end her training in advance one day. Feng Ling stood up with a cup of hot water in her hand. I see, boss. Li Nanheng didn't look back but walked straight out. His back was indifferent, as if he suddenly walked into the training camp, just now not for anyone, but to deliver a mission order. That was all. While boss was gone, Xiao Fei said in a low voice, That's good. You can also save 2 or 3 days of training. The intensity of the mission outside is not as high as now, but you must pay attention to safety. Besides, in the past 2 days, there were a lot of rumors about Feng Ling in the base. Many people paid special attention to her, standing in the corner and deliberately looking at her. When standing in the eye of the storm, it was better to leave the base for a few days. When this group of people stopped talking about these irrelevant topics, they would gradually calm down. After all, they were all men, and they wouldn't take it seriously. Feng Ling handed the hot water cup in her hand back to him. Then I'll go back to pack my things first. Deputy Drill Master Qiao, thank you for the hot water. Xiao Fei took the cup. Just now, she just held the cup in her hand and hadn't had time to take a sip. He nodded and didn't say much. Feng Ling left directly. Xiao Fei turned to look at the direction in which Feng Ling left quickly, and then glanced at the direction in which Boss Li had gone far away, thinking. Chapter 907. However, he didn't say anything. Now that he had sent Feng Ling out at the most appropriate time, it was equivalent to letting her take this opportunity to avoid all the gossip. Could it be that not only did Boss Li not intend to chase her away, but he was also secretly protecting her? However, she felt that it was unlikely. The Li family had always been very strict with many rules and regulations in the base, and the few old masters of the Li family were even more strict with men than women. If the few old masters of the Li family found out about this, the base would definitely be blown up by them. Given Boss Li's rational mind, he probably wouldn't take such a huge risk to protect Feng Ling. Besides, rumors were spreading everywhere now. However, if he wasn't protecting her, it was clearly just a small task for the police. But Feng Ling was sent out alone. Early the next morning, Feng Ling carried her sniper rifle and left the base to head to the Los Angeles Police Headquarters to help. The task of encircling and annihilating the criminals this time was very simple. She only needed to shoot the criminal leader in the window of the opposite building at the top of a 60-story building at the mission location. The only test was her marksmanship, accuracy, and proficiency in using a sniper rifle. Because the police informant would take the risk to lure the criminal to the appropriate location from the window of the opposite building. She could only succeed and not fail. Otherwise, many police officers would die for this. The police officers didn't particularly trust her marksmanship, but after all, she was sent by 11 base, so they could only take the risk and cooperate with her. However, the final result was that Feng Ling had completed her mission extremely well. She had fired a sniper shot into the building across the street from over 300 meters away, blowing up the back of the head of the criminal leader. Then, she had followed up with a shot to blow up the head of the most capable helper beside him, saving the police a lot of trouble. After 2 shots, she ended the mission. Feng Ling put away her gun and left directly without saying anything to anyone. However, just as she was about to return to 11 base, Xiao Su suddenly called her and said that the base would be hosting the VIPs in a few days, and there were still some things that needed to be prepared. He wanted to give her a list so that she could go buy the things after completing the mission outside and return to the base after she was done. After receiving the list from Xiao Su, Feng Ling saw that there were so many things on the list. Furthermore, she couldn't just buy all of them in Los Angeles. She still had to drive to the neighboring cities to buy them. Calculating the time, even if she bought all of them as quickly as possible, it would take at least 2 to 3 days. Why did it suddenly feel so good? Her stomach had been feeling unwell for the past 2 days, and she didn't want to go back to the base to feel the gazes of so many people. Feng Ling smiled and walked back to the car with the list in hand. She threw the gun in the car, got into the car, and drove to the first stop. In a large shopping mall in Los Angeles, there was a food and seasoning area on the first floor of the mall. Feng Ling walked in, and with a good sense of direction, headed straight for the place where she wanted to buy the seasonings. She asked for 20 kilograms of seasonings from the shop assistant. This was what the base used to entertain distinguished guests when making certain luxurious dishes. It was said that this seasonings was called misi. Very few people had eaten it before, and very few people knew what it was. The taste of this thing was very special, and generally, only very rich and tasteful chefs would buy it. Or perhaps, some countries would add this misi seasonings to certain dishes when entertaining distinguished guests, and the taste would be very delicious. However, the amount required at one time was too large, and it couldn't be bought in ordinary places. She had to buy it here. Moreover, this shop seemed to only prepare 20 kilograms of it every day. If she wanted more, she could only wait until the next day. After Feng Ling told the staff what she wanted, the staff nodded and went in. She waited outside. After about 10 minutes, she smelled a very light and elegant perfume approaching. She turned around and saw a young woman with a slim figure, wearing sunglasses walking past. Feng Ling didn't know much about the brands and bags that women wore. She only saw an H on the bag and a J on the shoes on her feet. She didn't see the other letters clearly, but it looked like they were expensive. Also, she vaguely felt that she had seen this woman somewhere before, but she couldn't remember clearly. The staff inside was just about to take out the 20 kilograms of seasonings for Feng Ling when she suddenly saw the woman walking in. She quickly walked up and asked. She didn't know what the woman said, but the staff hesitated for a moment before turning around and going back into the warehouse. After a while, she came out and said politely, "Miss Feng, this is the 20 kilograms of misai you wanted. It should be enough for the top chef you hired." Usually, such socialite gatherings would have a lot of dishes, and the taste would be even better with seasonings like misai. "Miss Feng, I didn't expect you to know about these things." Feng Ling stood at the side and glanced. At first, when the staff called her Miss Feng, she thought that he was calling her. She was wondering how this person knew that she was a woman. In the end, it was the person next to her. Feng Ling walked over. "I'm sorry, but isn't there a limit of 20 kilograms of this seasoning here every day? If I remember correctly, I was the one who came first. Also, when you went to the back to take out the things, you were about to give them to me. What's the meaning of this now? You're being interrupted halfway?" Her tone sounded gentle and calm, but her eyes clearly showed that she didn't intend to let the staff make the decision on their own. The staff was stunned for a moment, then turned to look at the so-called Miss Feng beside her. She was instantly put in a difficult position and said to Feng Ling in a low voice, "I'm sorry, Miss Feng is the eldest daughter of the Feng family. She has a VIP status in our mall. Besides, it's already very eye-catching for such a young lady to appear in such a gourmet seasoning area. If we offend her, we won't have an easy time. So please wait for another day." Feng Ling smiled, but there was no warmth in her eyes. "I can understand you, but I believe that your mall understands the rules of first come, first served. Even if she's the first lady, she should abide by the rules." The staff was in a difficult position for a moment. Only then did Miss Feng turn around and glance at Feng Ling. Then, she took off the sunglasses on her face and sized Feng Ling up from head to toe. Then she asked in confusion, "Have I seen you somewhere before?" After Miss Feng took off her sunglasses, Feng Ling saw her face clearly. When she heard her words, she finally remembered. That time in the hospital, when Madame Feng and Qin Shu were in her ward, the eldest daughter of the Feng family, Feng Mingzhu, had also come in once. At that time, Feng Ling didn't pay much attention to her, but at least they had brushed past each other like this, so she had some impression of her. Chapter 908. Seeing that she was so straightforward, Feng Mingzhu immediately raised her delicate eyebrows, looked at Feng Ling for a while, and smiled lightly, but the arrogance in her eyes did not diminish. "I remember, the wardship took me into last time. Oh, by the way, you are from 11 base, right?" Feng Ling didn't answer, but turned to look at the shop assistant and put the card aside. "This is the money for 20 pounds of seasoning. Hurry up, I'm in a hurry." The shop assistant didn't know whether she should take it or not. She turned to look at Feng Mingzhu. "Miss Feng, this..." Feng Mingzhu was still smiling. "Little brother, we have a very important socialite gathering tonight. We've invited a world-class chef who needs this kind of seasoning. I happened to be passing by here, so I came to buy it on the way. How about I pay for 40 caddies, and you can take the other portion tomorrow morning? How about that? It's a gift from me." Feng Ling's eyes were very indifferent. "No thank you. I'm not familiar with Miss Feng, so I don't need you to give me a gift. Besides, I don't need to explain the reason why I bought these things to you. Besides, the rule is first come, first served. I only ask about the rules, not the identity, and not the price." Feng Mingzhu choked for a moment. Her pride from a young age had made her used to looking at others with a charitable gaze. After all, there was nothing in this world that couldn't be solved with money. She was already very polite, but this brat's temper was very stubborn. He didn't even give her face. He had heard from Qin Shuk that she seemed to like him. He had such a bad temper, and wore a black combat uniform all day long. What kind of taste did Qin Shuk have? But her combat uniform? Feng Mingzhu's eyes paused, and then she maintained an elegant smile. Is it convenient for us to talk in private? No, it's not convenient. Feng Ling didn't intend to pay more attention to him. The shop assistant felt embarrassed. She felt that this young man's temper was not to be trifled with. Although he was very handsome and beautiful, he shouldn't be a person who would give up easily. And Miss Feng couldn't be provoked, so she decided to let the two of them discuss it. So the shop assistant quickly turned back to the warehouse, leaving a space for them to talk. Seeing that there was no one else around, Feng Mingzhu put the sunglasses in her hand into her bag, looked at Feng Ling, and said softly, "You are Nanhing's subordinate. You came out to buy these things because 11 base needs them? But we can't casually tell others about what happened in the base, right?" Feng Qi didn't have any intention of chatting with her, but this Miss Feng seemed to be implying something. She turned to look at Feng Mingzhu. "Since Miss Feng knows about 11 base, I won't say any more nonsense. Of course I know 11 base." There seemed to be some pride in Feng Mingzhu's eyes, as well as a little excitement. "How about this, let's discuss a condition." Feng Ling didn't want to talk about conditions. She was the one who came first. Even if she didn't understand the ways of the world, she knew that she was on the side of reason. Why should she talk about conditions? Feng Mingzhu continued to say, "As long as you can take me into your 11 base, I will give you these seasonings. It seems that you were sent out to purchase, right? If the purchasing mission is delayed, will it affect you? My conditions are not difficult. Just bring me back to your base." Feng Ling swallowed the word impossible that was on the tip of her tongue and said in a calmer tone, "Sorry, Miss Feng. 11 base has a clear rule that outsiders are not allowed to enter at will. Don't you know that I am not an outsider? I am Li Nanhing's fiancé." When Feng Mingzhu said the word fiancé, her eyes lit up. It was not difficult to see that she liked Li Nanhing. It was not the first time that Feng Ling heard that Boss Li had a fiancé, so she was not surprised. And Boss Li had said that as long as it was not from his mouth, she should not believe a single word. Feng Ling said indifferently, "Miss Feng, I really don't know you very well. I am just a member of the base, and I can't bring people into the base without permission. Since you are our boss's fiancé, why don't you ask our boss to take you there in person?" Feng Mingzhu seemed to be choked. If Li Nanheng was willing to see her and talk to her, she wouldn't need to run to 11 base to chase after her husband. The person she had loved for so many years refused to marry her, would rather marry her dead sister, and didn't even want to see him. The matter between me and Nanheng is a bit complicated. No matter how complicated it is, it has nothing to do with me. I only know that there is a rule of first come, first served when buying things outside. And I also know that outsiders are not allowed to enter and exit the base at will. Sorry, please excuse me." As Feng Ling spoke, she raised her hand and gently pushed her away politely. Then she bent down to pick up the bag of 10 kilograms of seasoning on the ground, and turned to take it aside, determined that she must take this thing away, and would not give it away. Seeing that she didn't get any benefits, Feng Mingzhu's face was no longer full of smile. She looked at Feng Ling for a while, and said with a hint of mockery on her lips, "I can pay double or even 10 times the price to buy this thing. I believe that the shop assistant and the boss will not refuse to take it. Why are you so stubborn?" Feng Ling was expressionless. There are surveillance cameras in the shopping mall. Any behavior of forcing people to buy or sell things is illegal. Miss Feng, if you have graduated from primary school, you should know this. If Miss Feng really wants the things that 11 base wants to take away, you can talk to Boss Li. There is no need to make things difficult for me. Besides, are you sure you want to snatch things from 11 base? Feng Mingzhu's hand on the bag immediately paused. No matter how powerful the Feng family was, the Feng family couldn't afford to offend 11 base. Besides, what she wanted to do was to leave a good impression in front of Nanheng, not to offend him or annoy him. Although she was unwilling, for the sake that this boy came from 11 base, Feng Mingzhu didn't argue with her anymore. However, she still looked angry and forced a smile. "All right, then I'll give it to you. But after all, you owe me a favor. If I have any request, I don't owe you a favor." Feng Ling didn't give her a chance to act. She glanced at her indifferently, and then turned to call the shop assistant to pay the bill. A few minutes later, she turned and left with the bag, not even looking at her. Feng Mingzhu had never seen such an ignorant and impolite person, nor had she seen a man who was so ungentlemanly in front of her. He didn't give her any face at all. Her expression was ugly. She turned to look in the direction of Feng Ling's departure, and heard the shop assistant next to her whisper, "Miss Feng, don't be too angry. This kind of stubborn person is mostly ignorant. I guess she doesn't even know how powerful the Feng family is. She is a frog at the bottom of a well. You don't have to be too calculative." Chapter 909. She didn't know if she was a frog at the bottom of a well, but she didn't give her any face at all. Feng Mingzhu held the bag in her hand and didn't say anything more. What was more angry was that Li Nanheng usually ignored her, and even the people around him were so rude to her. Did all the people from 11 Base have such a temperament? Feng Ling didn't want to talk to that Miss Feng at all. After leaving the mall, she put the bag of seasoning in the trunk, closed the trunk, and turned to get into the car. At the moment when the car door was opened, she suddenly felt a force. Feng Ling paused and turned her eyes expressionlessly, only to see that Feng Mingzhu, who had just pestered her in the basement of the mall, also came out. Glancing at Feng Mingzhu's hand on her car door, Feng Ling's voice was calm but obviously impatient. "What's the matter?" Feng Mingzhu continued to smile. "You know I am Li Nanheng's fiancé, but you still dare to be so indifferent to me?" Feng Ling looked at her indifferently and didn't answer, but her eyes clearly showed that she didn't buy it. The atmosphere was too silent and cold. Feng Mingzhu looked at her for a while and said, "What's your name?" Feng Ling. Feng Ling didn't intend to hide it, nor did she feel guilty. "Miss Feng, if you feel wronged, you can report my name at any time, so that when I go out to work in the future, Boss Lee can also tell me in advance to take care of you when I meet you outside. But Boss Lee has never mentioned your name before. I only listen to the orders of the base. Miss Feng, you really don't have to make things difficult for me." Seeing this, Feng Ling was neither servile nor overbearing. Feng Mingzhu coldly smiled and changed the topic. "Your surname is also Feng?" "Yes, unfortunately, my surname is also Feng." Feng Mingzhu's smile became even colder. In the Chinese circle in Los Angeles, there aren't many people with the surname Feng. This is fate. Maybe our ancestors were a family for hundreds of years. Just help your family. Can you take me back to the base? Take your hand away. Feng Ling didn't look at her anymore and opened the car door. When she saw that she was about to push the car door, the impatience in her eyes became more obvious, and the simple words carried a warning. The Feng family also has a close relationship with the American military. We're all together. Even if we enter the base, it won't affect us. Besides, my relationship with your boss. Before she could finish speaking, the car door in front of her suddenly opened. Feng Mingzhu's wrist was almost broken by the force. The pain caused her face to pale. She stared in disbelief at Feng Ling, who had already opened the car door expressionlessly, and sat in the driver's seat. "You." Without looking at her, Feng Ling buckled her seatbelt and closed the car door. She didn't even roll down the window to say another word to her, and directly started the engine. Seeing that this brat named Feng Ling was really going to drive, and that he didn't intend to hesitate at all, if she continued to pester him, she might really be hit by the car. Feng Mingzhu glared at the person in the car through the window, and could only take a step back. However, because her high heels were too high, she stumbled and almost fell. The smell of car exhaust poured into her nose, choking her and coughing several times. She raised her head and looked at the car that drove away without hesitation and disbelief. She was so angry that she smashed the bag in her hand hard on the ground. Feng Ling drove the car away and continued to the next stop. There were many things to buy, and she didn't want to waste time. When turning out of the intersection near the shopping mall, she still didn't look back at Feng Mingzhu, who was left behind. But she had heard from Kay that some women were particularly delicate, or liked to put on airs. Perhaps this Miss Feng was one of them. Sure enough, women were troublesome. Since she was a child, she had never been in a circle with too many women. The number of women she had met could be counted with 10 fingers. But so far, the most wonderful women she had seen were that Qin Shuk and this Miss Feng. One was innocent and clingy, and the other was noble and arrogant and born with the temper of a rich lady. She was so arrogant that people instinctively wanted to kick her in the face. If she had to pretend to live like this every day after becoming a woman, she might as well cut off the 2 lumps of flesh on her chest. Feng Ling stepped hard on the accelerator and drove the car out of Feng Mingzhu's sight. At night, the Feng family, after attending the socialite party, Feng Mingzhu returned to the Feng family's villa. She was a little tipsy, but when she entered the door, she saw 2 white rabbit-shaped lanterns hanging in front of the main gate of the Feng family's house every year on this day. As soon as she saw the white rabbit-shaped lanterns, her heart was instantly filled with anger. With the anger she had suffered outside this afternoon, she ignored the housekeeper who came out to greet her and quickly walked into the door. Sure enough, when she pushed the door open, she saw that Qin Xiu, who usually didn't come out of her room when she came home, was kneeling in front of the bodhisattva in the hall. "Mom, it's been so many years. Why are you still like this?" Feng Mingzhu angrily threw her bag on the table next to her, making a loud noise. "It's been almost 20 years. How long do you want to pay tribute to her? My sister has only lived in this world for a year. Our fate as mother and daughter is so shallow. Do you have to let me live in the shadow because of her? Do you have to let everyone know that I still have a dead sister? Ever since I was sensible, I knew that I had a dead sister. But I didn't even know what she looked like. I never thought she existed. But every year, you have to remind the family that her." Mingzhu, grandmother Feng and grandfather Feng, had just walked downstairs when they heard her voice. "Do you know what day it is today? You drank some wine outside and came back shouting. What do you look like? I really can't take it anymore. I was originally happy outside, but the moment I came home, I saw the white lantern hanging at the door. She has been dead for almost 20 years, but every year on this day, I have to hang a white lantern. I feel so scared." "What are you talking about? That lantern was the year your sister was born. Every time she cried in her swaddling clothes, your grandmother and I would use this kind of little rabbit lantern to coax her. Every time she saw the little rabbit lantern, she would smile. The rabbit lantern is all white. It's not the scary white lantern you're talking about. As a sister, you've been complaining for so many years." Grandfather Feng's face darkened. Chapter 9:10. Can't I complain? She has been dead for so many years, and Mom has been depressed for so many years because of her. She doesn't even go out of her room. As long as she comes out, she will kneel in front of Bodhisattva and pray for blessings. Feng Mingzhu said as she raised her hand to rub her forehead that hurt because of drunkenness. "I've had enough. It's precisely because you keep mentioning this person, who doesn't exist anymore, that the Li family would find such an excuse to marry a cenotaph instead of me. I've already been humiliated by the Li family, but you still want to hold a memorial ceremony for her at this time." Feng Mingzhu pointed to the emerald Buddha beads in Qin Xiu's hand, and the old baby clothes that were spread on the table in front of her. "How long will this memorial ceremony take? Will our family live under the shadow of accidentally dropping the child into the sea for the rest of our lives?" Hearing her words, Grandmother Feng's face suddenly darkened. "Child, you! How dare you?" Grandfather Feng said angrily. "This year is your sister's 18th birthday, and it has been 17 years since she sank to the bottom of the sea. If she is still alive, today will be her coming-of-age ceremony, just like your coming-of-age ceremony. She should have the same glory as you. After all, you are the granddaughters of our Feng family. But now that she is gone, can't we hold a memorial ceremony at home? You're so angry just because we hung 2 rabbit lanterns. Do you want our family to lose their memories and completely forget about your sister? I really hope that the whole world can forget about her. Then perhaps there won't be such a big joke that Li Nanheng wants to marry our second daughter's cenotaph. I'm that big joke." Feng Mingzhu clenched her hands tightly. "Mom, I'm also your daughter. Can't you put all your attention on the living? Do you have to spend so much energy thinking about someone who has been away for so many years? Today is your sister's 18th birthday. 18 years ago, when she was born, our family was very happy. At that time, you were very young and ignorant, but you also knew to surround the bed and laugh that you had a sister. We just want to commemorate her on such a day. As for other things, let's talk about it another day. Grandfather Feng frowned. Feng Mingzhu rolled her eyes at the 2 white rabbit lanterns hanging outside, picked up her bag, and went upstairs. Her footsteps were so fast that it was as if all the people who were mourning the second daughter of the Feng family were lunatics. No wonder Mingzhu doesn't have any feelings for her sister. At that time, Mingzhu was still young and didn't have a deep impression of her sister. Although what she said was a little too much, there's no need to take it to heart. Recently, she has been unhappy because the Li family broke off the engagement. Just give her some time. Grandmother Feng's expression softened. She sighed and said softly. Qin Qiu, who had been kneeling in front of the Bodhisattva, closed her eyes. After so many years, she didn't love Mingzhu less, but she didn't put all her love on her. She often thought of her second daughter and would be sad. Every year on this day, she would worship at home. After all, this was the poor child's birthday. However, in Mingzhu's eyes, her selfish thoughts and guilt towards her second daughter were very disgusting. She sighed, looked at the old clothes in front of her, and couldn't help feeling sad. Los Angeles night market. The shopping was not over yet, so Feng Ling couldn't return to the base for the time being. The hotel near the night market was not expensive, so she found a quiet, inexpensive, and good place to stay. She didn't eat anything in the evening, and was hungry at around 9 o'clock. She walked out of the hotel and walked around the night market, looking at the things on both sides of the street. However, in a few days, there would be an important inspection in the base, so she couldn't eat randomly, in case she got a stomachache and affected her performance. So she bought a small pizza that looked good to eat. There were too many people in the pizza shop, and there were no empty seats. Although the air was cold tonight, there was no wind. She took the pizza box and sat on a staircase in the middle of the night market. She took out the pizza and ate a few mouthfuls of the mineral water. From the corner of her eye, she saw a large cake shop not far away. Many young mothers and their children were buying cakes of various colors and flavors in the cake shop. They were full of happiness. Feng Ling looked at the various cakes in the cake shop window and bit the pizza in her mouth. When she was about to reach out to pick up the mineral water next to her, she touched nothing but a man's leather shoe. She paused, turned her eyes abruptly to look at the shoe she had touched, and then looked up along the man's black trousers. When she saw Li Nanheng's cold face, she suddenly felt her palms were hot and drew her hand back in fear. Li Nanheng looked at the crowd around him indifferently, and then glanced at Feng Ling, who was sitting on the dusty stone steps and eating a vegetarian pizza. His cold and indifferent lips curved up when she didn't see it. He slowly walked down the stairs until he was many steps lower than where she was sitting, turned around, and looked at Feng Ling, who was sitting there. The base asked you to come out to buy, but didn't limit your expenses. There are places to eat everywhere. Why are you sitting here and eating pizza? Feng Ling was expressionless. I didn't want to eat dinner, but I was suddenly hungry, so I came out to eat. She didn't ask why Li Nanheng suddenly came out. Anyway, he was the boss and could come and go as he pleased. No one could control him. She didn't ask how he knew she was here. The car she drove out of the base was equipped with a GPS tracker, and every member would know her whereabouts when she went out on a mission. This was not surprising. When other people went out on missions, whether it was a helicopter or a car, they also had GPS. Li Nanheng put one hand in his trouser pocket and looked back at the cake shop nearby. You've been looking at the cake in that shop. Haven't you eaten it? I've eaten it. When the brothers in the base celebrate their birthdays, some people will occasionally buy it back, and I've eaten some. Feng Ling lowered her head to bite the pizza. There was something in her mouth, and she said lightly, "It's just that kind of cream. It's nothing special." Li Nanheng glanced at her. "Do you want to eat it?" Feng Ling paused and raised her eyes to look at him. She watched as the man stood at the foot of the stairs with a pleasant expression, but at the same time, she thought about how cruel and shameless this man could be when he was raging. Chapter 9:11. Seeing Feng Ling raise the bottle to drink, Li Nanheng curved his lips. When she put down the bottle and looked at him again, his expression became cold and indifferent again. Feng Ling screwed the bottle and turned to leave. The man behind her glanced at her. "Come back. Why are you leaving?" She turned back to look at him. "Boss, I've just finished my task at the police station. I've been busy with the procurement this afternoon. It's already very late. I should go back to rest. Do you still want me to accompany you to walk the road?" Li Nanheng pointed to the cake shop with his chin. "Let's go eat cake first." Feng Ling stared into his eyes and was sure he was not joking. When their eyes met, everything this man did to her that night seemed to be still vivid in her mind. She looked away. "I'm already full." However, as soon as she finished speaking, the man held her wrist and pulled her toward him. Feng Ling barely stabilized her body so that she wouldn't lean into his arms. She raised her eyes and struggled to free her hand. She secretly hated him in her heart, but on the surface, she still looked cold and impatient. Tonight's task is to eat cake." The man turned around. If she hadn't been struggling, he might have held her hand, but now that she was more stubborn than a donkey, he could only hold her wrist and pull her behind him. Feng Ling staggered to the door of the computer shop with him. She was about to speak, but the man didn't even intend to stop and let her in. After entering the door, the staff inside all looked back at them and rushed over. Because there were outsiders around, Feng Ling couldn't be too cold, so she could only pull her hand out and stand behind the man. Her expression was still a little impatient, but she didn't leave willfully. "Gentlemen, do you want to order a cake?" Before Li Nanheng spoke, Feng Ling suddenly said, "No, we just came in to take a look." Before she finished speaking, Li Nanheng glanced at her. His eyes were very indifferent, but seemed to be warning her. Feng Ling turned away and pretended not to see him. The tall man walked straight in and saw that there was a place to sit and rest in the cake shop. He called the staff over and pointed to a small but delicate cake by the window. "What taste is it?" "There are blueberries and strawberries in that cake. It tastes very delicious. Sir, do you want to buy one?" Hearing there were blueberries, Li Nanheng raised his eyebrows, took out a card and handed it to the staff. "This is it. We'll eat here. We'll book the space inside for the time being. Don't let others disturb us." The clerk took the card from him and saw that it was a black card. He immediately nodded and said eagerly, "All right, please wait a moment, sir. We'll bring it to the table inside right away. Please take a seat inside." Li Nanheng did not speak again. With one hand in his trouser pocket, he turned to look at Feng Ling, who was still standing in front of the door. He saw that her face was expressionless, but from her clenched fingers, he could see the hesitation in her heart. "I've already bought it. If you don't want to eat it, you can dispose of it. Come and sit down," the man said coldly and walked in. Feng Ling looked to the side and saw that the staff were about to take the cake in, so she walked in. Seeing that Li Nanheng chose a spacious seat, she walked over and sat down in front of him. When the staff brought the cake over and asked them what they wanted to drink, Feng Ling put the mineral water in her hand on the table. The staff understood what she meant and didn't dare to ask anymore, turning to leave. Li Nanheng looked at Feng Ling's unapproachable expression. "There are some milk tea drinks in this shop. Don't you want to try them?" "I'm not interested." Feng Ling put the water in her hand. "Then let's eat the cake. I remember Kay said you like blueberries. There are blueberries in this cake. It should suit your taste." Feng Ling looked at the cake in front of her and pursed her lips. "Boss, just this once. Don't do it again. I just took a look outside and didn't say that I wanted to eat it. Then eat it this time. Don't talk so much nonsense." Li Nanheng threw the silver lighter on the table, intending to sit here and wait for her to finish eating. Feng Ling had to pick up the small fork and cut a piece of the cake. After thinking for a while, she cut another piece and put it in front of him. The man didn't eat it, but focused on watching her eat the cake with the small fork. Feng Ling was really uncomfortable being stared at by the man like this, but she felt even more uncomfortable if she looked up at him. So she could only lower her head and eat in small bites. Although the taste of this cake was really good, sweet but not greasy, and the taste of the chopped blueberries and strawberries was very good, she had just eaten pizza, and couldn't eat so much at once. She could only taste it. This cake was not big, and she felt that she could only eat half of it at most. After being stared at for a long time, she raised her head and instantly met the man's eyes. Her hand holding the fork paused for a moment. "Why don't you eat it? I'll just watch you eat. I'm not interested in dessert." As the man spoke, he saw that she liked to pick blueberries and put them in her mouth first. It seemed that she really liked eating blueberries. Feng Ling didn't really understand people like Li Nanheng. Didn't they say that when they like someone, many people would be embarrassed to speak up? Even men would express their feelings tactfully, but Li Nanheng was really honest with her. If he liked her, he liked her. If he wanted her to eat the cake, he wanted her to eat the cake. He didn't even have a roundabout way. She could only continue eating. Not long after, she heard the man's seemingly casual tone. "You don't know when your birthday is?" Feng Ling made an N sound, sipped the sweet cream in her mouth, and said in a low voice, "The date of birth written in the information was only temporarily set by the person who took me in when I was young. I really don't know when I was born, so I've never taken my birthday too seriously." "You don't know who your parents are?" Feng Ling looked up at him and thought for a moment. In the end, she didn't tell him that she grew up in a wolf cave. After all, those hardships had long passed, and there was no need to mention it. She only answered, "I don't know. I've been an orphan for as long as I can remember." Li Nanheng watched as she clearly faced an unknown and confused past, but never complained, nor was she pretentious at all. Li Nanheng didn't say more. Although he wanted to pretend to be cold and indifferent, his heart still softened. "And continue eating the cake." The man picked up the lighter to light a cigarette, but hesitated for 2 seconds. He didn't move, and stayed by the table to continue watching her. Chapter 9:12. After leaving the cake shop, Feng Ling planned to go back to rest. But because of Li Nanheng's presence, she couldn't say it out loud. She was afraid that he would say that since they were both men, he could just stay in her room for one night. Thus, she passed by the hotel in the night market. She went back and forth several times, but Feng Ling never said that she would go back. He wanted to see how long she could hold on, so he quietly accompanied her around the night market. In the end, he bought a bunch of unnecessary things and carried them in his hands. There were more and more of them. At nearly 11 o'clock in the evening, the night market was about to close. Feng Ling resisted the urge to yawn. "Boss, are you busy in the city tonight? If you have something to do, I won't disturb you. You can go back first." Li Nanheng's expression didn't change. "Nothing. It's getting late. I can stay nearby for one night." "Feng Ling." "Boss, help yourself." Seeing her dodge, Li Nanheng smiled lightly, but there was no obvious smile in his eyes. He only watched her fair little face when she turned away, and then glanced at her deliberately short hair. "Do you want to find your parents?" Feng Ling then looked at him. "How?" "If you want, you just need to report your DNA to the police, and I'll send someone to supervise them. If your parents are still alive, it won't take long to find them. After all, technology is so advanced now. As long as you want to, you can find them." Feng Ling was silent for a moment. "Forget it. I've never thought about this kind of thing. I've been used to being alone since I was young. Besides, I'm not sure if they didn't want me at all, so they threw me away. Why should I look for them? Even if it's just an accident, it has been so many years. I guess they have other children and a happy family, and they should have forgotten me. No one will forget their children. Boss, I'm not good at communicating with people. Even if I really find out who my parents are, I won't go back to them. I'm fine now." Looking at her calm expression, Li Nanheng raised his hand to rub her hair. But the moment he raised his hand, he paused, put it back into his trouser pocket, and said indifferently, "It seems that you have deep feelings for 11 base. 11 base is the only place that gives me a sense of belonging." Feng Ling answered truthfully, seeing the trace of exhaustion in her eyes. When the two of them passed by the hotel, Li Nanheng stopped. "Go take a rest. After the shopping, go back to the base. Don't run around." Feng Ling nodded. After Li Nanheng left, Feng Ling lowered her head to look at the pile of things in her hands. There were half-eaten cakes in boxes, as well as some things that she had bought from some stalls. There were all kinds of things, but why were most of them pink? She had clearly said that she didn't mind, but the colors Bosley chose for her were so girlish, but it looked really good. After another 2 days, Feng Ling brought the things she needed to buy back to the base. In the past 2 days, she didn't train so frequently, and her stomach was no longer so uncomfortable. Her period was almost over, and she could prepare for the various inspections of the United Nations and the U.S. military at any time. On the night before the visit of the inspection team, while there was no one on the training ground, Feng Ling went to practice with a sniper rifle alone. However, when she arrived at the training ground, she heard several gunshots and saw that Kay was practicing even earlier than her. What a coincidence! Hearing the footsteps, Kay turned around and saw her. He immediately smiled and sorted out the remaining bullets with the gun in his hand. Then he looked at the gun in her hand. No wonder you're so good at the exams. Do you often come out at night to practice by yourself? No, I rarely come out at night. There will be an inspection tomorrow. No matter what, I have to pay attention to it. Feng Ling also walked over. However, as soon as she walked over, she suddenly saw that the other 3 had also come. The 5 of them looked at each other and laughed in an instant. Tam said, "It seems that everyone is the same. Our sniper team was taught by Boss Lee and Drillmaster Chow every day. We must not lose face for the base. It seems that we all understand this. We actually all came at the same time in the evening. Although they had trained for a whole day during the day, the 5 of them were still in high spirits at this time, practicing shooting and laughing wildly. Such a peaceful night, when they recalled it many years later, still felt their blood boiling." The next day the inspection team arrived. There were about 17 or 18 people. It was said that they were all high-level figures of the United Nations and the military, who were rarely seen. Although the management of 11 base was militarized, there were times of freedom and occasional laxity, but this time, they lined up neatly, and no one was perfunctory. There was no need for the drill master and elderly to say anything at all. Everyone knew the importance of today's task, so everyone took it seriously and did not hesitate. After an entire day of inspection, from the elite squads to the rookie squads, and then to the other major training camps, such as melee combat, long-range shooting, and long-range high-energy sniping, all of these specialized training camps were all inspected. After the inspection, it was time to see the abilities of each team. In the evening, the 5 members of the sniper team appeared as the finale. The 5 of them performed a beautiful long-range sniper from 300 meters away. All of them hit the bullseye, and their penetrative power was extremely strong, consecutively piercing through 3 targets. When the 5 of them first entered the sniper team, they were ranked first, but after so many months of training, the 5 of them were now almost equal in ability. Only Li Nanheng and Xiao Fei, who personally supervised the sniper team every day, knew how much effort each of them had put in, including last night when the 5 of them secretly went to the training camp to continue training. Although they did not break the harmonious atmosphere of hard work, they were well aware of how outstanding they were, and how united they were. After a whole day of inspection, almost every training camp won applause. 11 Base was indeed 11 Base. It did not live up to its reputation. The appearance of the sniper team was even more resounding. A certain leader of the United Nations, who had only occasionally applauded, couldn't help but clap harder when he saw the achievements of these 5 people. Chapter 913. In the evening, at 11 Base's celebration party, the sniper team was praised by the leaders one after another. After 3 rounds of drinks, a very influential leader in the U.S. military, named Danny Ken, specially went to the table where the members of the sniper team were seated and sat down to speak with them. He even sat next to Feng Ling and praised her even more. From time to time, he would ask her how old she was and when she entered the base. In short, it was not difficult to see that this Daniken seemed to be very interested in Feng Ling. Feng Ling was not good with words, so she could only answer whatever was on her mind. Li Nanheng was chatting with someone at the table of the UN leaders. Glancing at Feng Ling's awkward situation, he smiled and said something to the person next to him, put down the glass in his hand, and turned to walk over. Mr. Daniken. As Li Nanheng approached, he casually patted Feng Ling's shoulder. At the same time, he turned to look at Daniken, who was seated by her side. Although these brats from the sniper team did shine brilliantly today, they are usually busy with training and missions. They aren't very good at socializing, and are afraid of saying or doing the wrong things. They are even more reserved when sitting with someone of your status. Mr. Daniken, please don't take it to heart. Ha ha ha, I don't mind. Daniken chuckled. He then glanced at Feng Ling, who appeared rather reserved. I'm just here to ask this little brother how old he is this year. He doesn't look old, but from his performance today, I can tell he's very outstanding. Feng Ling nodded. Li Nanheng curved his lips slightly and pressed his hand against Feng Ling's shoulder. Only then did Feng Ling react. She immediately stood up and said, Mr. Daniken, I'm sorry. I need to go to the bathroom. Let our boss sit here and accompany you for a few drinks. With that, she got up and looked at Li Nanheng's eyes. She understood what he meant. He wanted her to leave first, lest it would be too embarrassing to sit here and chat with him. She really didn't know what to talk to him about. At this moment, she was also grateful that Boss Li could understand her mind. She looked at him inconspicuously and quickly turned to leave. Li Nanheng sat down, poured 2 glasses of wine, and drank with Daniken. At the same time, they chatted about the base, but the topic eventually returned to Feng Ling. After Feng Ling returned from the restroom, Daniken turned to Feng Ling and said, the U.S. military sniper team also goes through very professional training. This year, we just recruited a batch of new recruits. They're not very old, but they're all very impetuous and not easy to manage. I see that little brother Feng Ling is about the same age as them, but he's already so accomplished. If we invite him to train with our sniper team for 2 months, he should be a very good role model. Hearing this, Li Nanheng's expression did not change, but there was something in his eyes. He put the wine glass on the table. Feng Ling and the other 4 members of the sniper team also understood Daniken's meaning. He wanted Feng Ling to help the American sniper team, taking the outstanding members of 11 base to the military team. If they wanted to poach them, wouldn't their purpose be too obvious? Seeing that Feng Ling's expression did not change, Daniken said again, little brother Feng Ling, you don't have to think too much. We just hope that you can go to our team and set a good example for the new members. We'll let you come back in at most 1 or 2 months. Although we do admire you very much, of course, we don't have the guts to poach someone from Mr. Li's team. Don't you think so, Mr. Li? Daniken looked at Li Nanheng beside him with a smile. Li Nanheng curled his lips indifferently. It seemed to be a smile, but there was no warmth in his eyes or voice. Mr. Daniken, you must be joking. It's not that I'm arrogant, but if someone really wants to poach someone from my team, I'm afraid it won't be so easy. Daniken looked at the 5 members at the table with a smile. Really? If the U.S. military offers better treatment to the 5 members of the sniper team, won't you consider joining the military team? The 5 people at the table looked at each other and didn't speak. Did they think they were stupid? No place was better than 11 base, especially the place of these Americans. They were too self-righteous and thought that everyone in the world wanted to join their army. In fact, every member of 11 base was quite disdainful of them. They didn't know where they got their confidence from, but they didn't speak. In this situation, even if 11 base and the military were evenly matched, as long as Boss Li didn't break the superficial peace, they naturally wouldn't talk nonsense. Not getting the response he wanted, Daniken raised his eyebrows and looked at Feng Ling. This time, we want to invite little brother Feng Ling over just to exchange pointers between 11 base and the U.S. military. We don't mean anything else, but if we really want little brother Feng Ling to join us in the future, we may offer a generous bonus of at least $3 million a year. Little brother, won't you consider it? Feng Ling smiled politely but didn't answer. The other 4 also didn't speak, but they were instantly amused. The people in the military were really arrogant. They probably thought that they were the only ones with the most money, but they didn't know that the United Nations had always been on 11 Base's side. Whether it was the public funding from the United Nations or the Lee family behind this base, they didn't lack money at all. Not to mention Feng Ling, who could get hundreds of thousands of dollars every time he went out on a mission. Even the other newcomers in the base could easily make a lot of money in a year. They used money as a temptation. It could be seen how ignorant the military was, and how much they didn't understand 11 Base. Li Nanheng also glanced at Feng Ling at this time. "Do you want to go?" Boss Li suddenly asked, and Feng Ling answered directly, "If it's just to learn from each other for a month or two, I can accept it. I don't need any reward. As for the rest, thank you very much for your praise, Mr. Danny Ken. I have a deep affection for 11 Base, and will not leave easily. Besides, I don't lack money." Boss Li nodded. "I don't lack money." These simple and pure words became an invisible slap on Daniken's face. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Sword of Destiny YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.